Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're just going to start. We're expecting someone else to join us at some point, but we're just going to get going on with the agenda. Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's meeting of the Lifelong Learning Committee. Can I remind councillors and officers to use microphones, and you need to press the button for new people to the committee, to press the button until the red light comes on, or it won't pick, the cameras won't pick you up. So maybe that's a reason not to press the button properly. Anyway, and can I request that those attending the meeting ensure that all mobile phones and other devices are on silent. Can I remind everyone attending the meeting that this is being recorded and will be available on YouTube via the Council's website following the meeting. Can I ask if there's any apologies for today's meeting?
We have apologies from Councillor Audrey Coates and substitute John Duff, apologies from Fraser MacDonald, and apologies from Mrs McFarlane. Apologies from Beth Pover.
Apologies from Beth Pover at the last minute, but we'll substitute from Councillor Donaldson if that's acceptable to the convener.
Okay. Moving on to item 2, can I ask if there's any declarations of interest in respect of the business on the agenda? Thank you. And can we agree the minute of the committee of 22nd of August 2018 for signature?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson, presume substituting for Councillor Pover.
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Can we note the minute of the Joint Negotiating Committee for Teaching Staff of the 19th of June? And the minute of the Children, Young People and Families Partnership of the 8th of June? And can we also note the minute of the Economy and Lifelong Learning Committee of the 23rd of February 2018? Now, moving on to item 5, which is non-council members, can we ratify the appointments of 2 new teacher reps as non-voting members on the committee? I'm delighted to welcome Mrs Carolyn Weston, who will represent the primary school sector, and Mrs Audrey Macaulay, who will be well known to many of us, who will represent the secondary school sector. You're very welcome, ladies, and we made sure you had microphones so you didn't have to use your teacher voices.
Can I just ask if we've had nominations for the 3rd religious rep?
We have had nominations, and we will. I've arranged to meet with the reps. I can't remember, later in November, and then nominations will come forward to committee at possibly the next, which will be January, the January committee. So you'll be kept updated on that. Thank you. Which takes us on to paper 6. The statutory consultation on Balhousie Primary School. In bringing forward this paper, we take a further step along the road to achieving our ambition to provide a well-designed, accessible, modern school with exceptional indoor and outdoor facilities. At our previous meeting of this committee, we heard of the dire state of the current Balhousie Primary School building and the issues which would be unresolved in allowing access to new modern facilities at this school, even if we were to invest millions of pounds. We also heard about the state of the North Muirton Primary School and the requirement for it to be replaced. This administration have ambition to deliver the very best we possibly can for all these young people and for future generations of young people, and we want to take this step and deliver, as part of our school estate review, the very best we can for the communities of Balhousie and North Muirton. I particularly urge all members, and I'm sure you've had lots of time to read all the papers, to carefully read the section of the report where Education Scotland comment on the paper, and moving on from here to ensure that we work together to deliver equity, fairness and the very best we can for all in these communities. And I'll ask Sheena Devlin to introduce the report.
Thank you, Convener. In January 2018, this committee considered the option appraisal for Balhousie Primary School. The findings of that report concluded that the only reasonable option was to close Balhousie Primary School and for pupils to move to a larger new build primary. it was agreed that a formal consultation was to be undertaken to allow consideration to be given to the closure proposal by key stakeholders and other interested parties. The outcome and findings from the consultation have now been reported and published in the consultation report, along with the Education Scotland report. The report from Education Scotland acknowledges that the Council's proposal would lead to many clear and strong educational benefits for all pupils involved. Education Scotland has identified that the Council's proposal has the potential to improve experiences and outcomes for children from both schools. The proposal will provide a well-designed, accessible, modern, purpose-built teaching space which would benefit both Balhousie Primary School and North Muirton Primary School's pupils and indeed families. This could not be achieved by refurbishing Balhousie Primary School, as limited improvement could be made to the overall suitability of that school. The report demonstrates that we have put in place a robust approach in meeting our legislative requirements and fully considering, as we have to, the educational benefits to current and future pupils. Today, the committee is being asked to consider and approve the proposal to permanently close Balhousie Primary School, with pupils receiving their education at a larger new build primary school with effect from August 2022. It should be noted that if approval is given today to close Balhousie Primary School, that both essential and other ongoing repairs and maintenance would continue at Balhousie Primary School. And similarly, if the proposal is approved, the new build would represent a brand new school that would require a new name, new identity and ethos, which would be developed by all partners involved.
Thank you, Sheena. Can I ask if there's any questions on the report? Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Convener. I've got 3 questions here. The first one is on page 32, and it's paragraphs 211 and 212, which states that 59 parents opposed. But when one reads this, it seems that this is dismissed because the children will not be attending the school when the closure comes. Now, when we're doing these consultations, obviously, if the school is going to be 4+ years in being built, this causes anomaly. So is there some sort of weighting you use to these? Is it not 59 parents now because some of them will not be? Or how is this going to work? Can someone explain that to me?
I'm kind of not quite clear about what you're trying to get to.
I'm asking how much weight is given to 59 parents that have opposed it in the consultations, whereas then there's a statement made saying that these parents as children would not be attending the school when the closure comes because of the 4+ years until the other school would be ready.
I'm going to make a presumption here, but that would just be a statement of fact that of the 59 parents who replied, that number will not have children that will be in the school at the point that the new school would open. Is that correct?
It's a statement of fact.
So it's a statement of fact, but the 59 is still taken as 59.
Well, that's what it says in the report, so I would...
Well, why then did it make a statement of fact that, you know, what was the point of it?
I presume it's to clarify at what stage in the school those parents' children are. So nothing more than that.
Thank you. Right, we'll go to page 35. I hope I've got this right. And it's 6.1. We're referring to the time scale again. And it states that it's 4+ years. There's no guarantee it's 4 years. I think we'll all agree on that. If we get a slippage beyond 4 years, I worked out that the total costs of maintenance, but I don't know if this includes other repairs that might be required, will be £140,876 over 4 years. If it transpires that we can't deliver this in 4 years, how much additional spending will be required on Balhousie, and how will that affect the figures? that are justifying the closure of it and the building of a new school. I mean, this is not an occasion where we're taking children and moving them into school right in the next year. We're talking 4, perhaps longer, years.
That be
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. As I said in my opening remarks, that for the duration of Balhousie's primary school remaining open, any ongoing maintenance or essential maintenance would be undertaken. Now, exactly how much that would cost, I'm not sure how you got to your figure of approximately £148,000, and I'll ask John Beveridge to come in as well. But we do have a programme that of monies through the capital budget that we are able to spend in terms of maintenance of schools, and that is kept under review. So if if Balhousie, it was agreed today, was closed, and if it was longer than 4 years and it transpired that there was works needing to be done, then there would be a judgment made depending on how much those additional works were as to when and where that might best take place. So, for example, there might be alternative arrangements that could be made that would be less costly than some expenditure on maintenance, but it's impossible to look that far into the future and know what might need to be done beyond the 4-year period. The only reassurance we can give you, I think, is that ongoing maintenance of Balhousie Primary and essential maintenance would continue to be carried out whilst there are still pupils receiving their education there. I don't know, John, if there's anything further that John Beveridge can add to that.
I think the 4-year period should be sufficient time to do a replacement school if that was the case. However, in maintenance, we will have a plan in place for dealing with whatever comes up in that building. There is a number of items that we've got on the radar just now. Electrical compliance works. We'll need to look at the heating system. We've got that in our plans just now, so we will keep the building going indefinitely.
Can I just ask about the reports of water ingress in the windows? Surely that's quite a big item to try to address. If that's what's reported now, in 4+ years, because there's no guarantee at 4 years, let's get that clear, what's that going to accrue to?
In terms of the water ingress coming from external, there is a report which states that we would have to look at intrusive surveys to identify the actual root cause of that condition. But regardless, we will have to address it. If obviously we're doing a longer term solution, it will be more costly, but we will have to keep the building going indefinitely, whatever decision is made here today.
Thank you. I've got one last one.
make it brief, Councillor Anderson, because there's other people
Yeah,
want to come in.
I'll try and be as brief as I can. It goes to page, and I won't look it up, I've got it here, 49 to 50, the third bullet point. What evidence is there that double stream education is better for our children in a single stream education system? Are our children disadvantaged, as is suggested in the paragraph there, by single stream education? Because it's also repeated again in a 3.23 in the bullet point 2 there. It's suggested that double stream is a better form of education.
I'll definitely refer that one to Mrs. Devlin.
Councillor Anderson, can you point me to where it says double stream is preferable to single stream in the report,
Right,
please?
hold on then. We're talking about 49. Sorry to delay other people that have obviously you don't have. Right, it must be the last bullet point in 321, or is it 323? 321, and it's repeated again in 32. It's basically saying the staff who currently don't have a stage partner, well, if you're single stream, you don't have a stage partner, because the school is single stream, we'd have the benefit of working alongside a partner in the new school, providing new opportunities of peer support and challenge and the sharing of ideas. Well, that's clearly stating that, as far as I can see, that's kind of, it is stating that it's more preferable to be in a double stream education than single stream.
I would disagree that it's stating that it's more beneficial. I think it's just a statement of fact that if you move from a school where you don't have a stage partner to one where you do, that there are benefits for the staff in relation to that. It doesn't mean to say that our schools that are single stream or less, which account for over half the schools in Perth and Kinross, are at a disadvantage because of that, because a number of schools will find means of working between schools or within schools. In educational benefits terms, what we do not do is compare one with another. So there isn't a comparison here that says this is better. What we're asked to do with educational benefits is just to simply state what might any of the benefits be, and that's a statement of fact that that might be a benefit for those working in the school. It's not a value judgment on single stream schools, I can assure you.
As I say, reading it as a layman, one gets the impression that it is a comparison. And as I say, the report, as I say, if it was just once, but it suggests it twice, it is quite alarming.
Thanks for your opinion on that, Councillor Anderson. Yep. Councillor Forbes, followed by Councillor Duff, and then Ms McCall.
Thank you, Convener. Not that this report is unclear, I'm just looking for clarification on page 32, because I'm quite surprised by something I read here. If I understand this correctly, 556 people were invited to the consultation, yet over 2 meetings, only 1 parent turned up. And I think, if my math serves me well, 12 members of the public. So is that correct? And just out of curiosity, I guess, what were the 12 members of the public there for? Is it to do with the building and what may happen to the building?
Councillor Forbes, the figures that are in the report are factually accurate. And in terms of the other people who attended the meeting, I'll ask Karen Robertson to give a bit of information in relation to who they were there representing.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Whilst the invitations that were sent out were to the statutory consultees, being parents and staff, etc., our meetings have always been kept open to the wider public, so anyone who wanted to come along and express an opinion can do so and can make their views known to the council. So the members of the public who attended were from the local community, some neighbours of the school, and some persons from a local nursing home who were interested in the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. My question is in regard to section 3 on page 33 of the report, and probably more specifically 3.2. In accordance with the legislation, Education Scotland has examined the educational aspects of the proposal, and we note that there were clear and strong potential educational benefits which would be afforded by approving the proposal. It talks about better modern learning facilities and improved experiences for all the children, but I wonder if you could expand on this and provide members with some more details about the educational benefits that the new school would provide. And I have one follow-up question.
Ask the Executive Director to take that on.
There's a significant amount of detail in relation to the educational benefits statement that's actually included within the consultation report, Councillor Duff. So is it in further information in addition to that which is in the consultation report that you're looking for? Because what it covers are aspects such as learning and teaching. It talks about the flexible and adaptable use of a new build. And again, what it doesn't do in educational benefits is say, and this is better because, it simply states that this will be the environment and here are the benefits of it. It talks about the fact that there would be more GP rooms, meeting rooms, a multi-purpose games hall. If we think about Balhousie Primary, currently the outdoor area is classified as a D, and therefore the outdoor area at the new school would be better than the young people currently experience, and therefore there would be benefits in terms of outdoor activities that could be pursued in that area. So there is, you know, quite a significant list. As I say, much of it is detailed actually within the body of the consultation report. So I'm not sure if you want any more information other than that kind of thing.
No, it was exactly that kind of thing. I think I read as well about the ability to provide things like nursery in early years that maybe we don't have currently in Balhousie.
There is actually nursery provision at Balhousie Primary, and nursery provision would continue to be provided at the new school if that was what was agreed today.
I'm correct that in the paper it refers to wraparound care being on offer at the new primary school. Is that correct? It refers, I haven't got the reference in the paper, to a breakfast club and after school club being proposed, which would provide wraparound care, which would be a benefit to not just the pupils but to their families also. Is that correct? Councillor Duff.
So I have just one further question, if that's okay, Convener. Can I just ask what the views are of the parents and staff at North Muirton Primary School with regards to the provision of the new school? Has that been asked?
I believe that's also covered in the report, but I'll ask Karen to take that.
Yes, the responses that we have received that have been reported are the whole consultation, which is the parents of Balhousie and North Muirton. So the numbers that are contained within the summary is the totality of who we consulted. So within that there is the breakdown of the number of parents in total from Balhousie and North Muirton that responded, and with staff as well. So they are not separated out, but the consultation that took place at North Muirton, there weren't any negative issues raised by the staff or the parents that took part in our events.
That's fine, thank you.
Okay, I have Mr McCall followed by Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to talk about page 57, section 5.7, which says that the following schools affected by the proposal are Balhousie Primary School and North Muirton Primary School. Now, it would seem obvious to me that St John's is bang in the middle of them, so will somehow be affected. So has there been any reviews of how continuing with this proposal would affect placing requests, the role at St John's, and would there be the consideration of reviewing the catchment area?
Could I just ask for clarification which catchment area you're referring to?
So, from what I understand, Balhousie and North Muirton will become one catchment area. So, if that's going all the way round St John's, will you review St John's and then the catchment area of those two schools subsumed?
Just to let you know that the catchment area for St John's is quite different because it is a denominational school. So it's entirely different, and therefore there wouldn't really need to be a review of the catchment of St John's, because this does not impact on that per se. But I'll ask Karen Donaldson, goodness me, she's not even here, so I would be hard pressed to get an answer. I'll ask Karen Robertson to provide you with a bit more information about that.
In terms, the Schools Consultation Scotland Act 2010 determines what an affected school actually is. So whilst I understand the point that you're making in that St John's is situated between the two schools, it is not a directly affected school, as it is a denominational school, and its catchment area actually sits right across the top of both Balhousie and North Muirton Primary School. So they're not seen as three separate schools with a similar interest in this change, because whether or not the change, the proposal was to be implemented for Balhousie, it wouldn't have any impact on the admission arrangements or the parish which determines the catchment for St John's. That would be the same as it is today, and whether or not the proposal was implemented.
That answer your question?
I'd also like to ask, the previous St John's Primary School building is sitting derelict at the moment, boarded up. Is that the plan for Balhousie School should it shut down, or has there been anything looked at as to what we could do to make sure that we don't have two of them in the Balhousie area?
The old St John's Primary School is actually been earmarked, and there's developments at quite an advanced stage for use as a creative hub for small creative industries.
Thank you.
Okay, I have Councillor Reid followed, oh no, Councillor McDade followed by Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Convener. In January, I described in quite significant detail to the committee what I had discovered from walking around Balhousie Primary School in the morning in terms of the building's condition, things such as the heating not working, plasters falling off the roof, leaking roofs, windows falling in, all manner of things that we would not consider suitable in a school, and it certainly appalled me at that point, and it still does. So my first question, and I'll just give you them all because they're all linked really, what do we consider to be essential maintenance? Because the Executive Director has given us a reassurance already today that essential maintenance will continue for the next 4 years, but I would have thought all the things that I have listed and others would be considered essential maintenance, so I'd like to know a bit more about what essential maintenance is going to be also carried out over the next 4 years while the school is still operating, and would it not make more sense for us to put these children into a decant school in the time while the school is being built so that they're in a much better, safer environment, and rather than us pumping huge amounts of money in to keep a building up that really is not in a good condition.
Pass that on to John Beveridge.
Thank you, Councillor. The essential maintenance that we're looking at over the next 4 years is essentially to keep the building wind and watertight first and foremost, to also keep it compliant, to keep it safe, and to make it as comfortable as possible for the building users. So there's a few main items in there which need to be addressed, as you mentioned already. There's some water ingress problems which we're looking at just now. There's some heating replacement works to be done. We've just completed approximately £17,000 worth of reactive repairs since the last time that you visited, and I visited the school myself also and walked around with the head teacher to identify what was needing done immediately. So over and above that, we've also carried out about £100,000 worth of capital improvements, which is replacement fire alarm system, lighting and emergency lighting. So we continue to monitor the situation within the school, and anything that's identified, we will address it as and when it develops.
John or Carol on the question of a decant option.
It would be quite difficult to find a decant location for Balhousie Primary School that was local to Balhousie. Obviously, the most obvious place would be actually in the school playground, but if we decanted into the school playground, there wouldn't be any school playground. We did look around for ground within the area, potentially, when we did the options appraisal, because we looked at building a new school for Balhousie, but there wasn't really anything in the area that we could do. Obviously, John and myself be working quite closely together, so if it did come to the point that we couldn't deal with works within the school, we would look at it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the reassurance. I'm pleased to hear that significant improvements have happened since I last visited. I think just on my point, from my point of a decant school, having been in one, the experience was it doesn't actually take up that much space. I appreciate there is not much space around Balhousie and it has a very constricted site. However, perhaps if parking was not available within the school grounds, etc., there might be enough room, given it is not a huge school roll, 100 pupils. I think the amount of money we're pumping in for what is not an ideal environment and probably would still be better in a decant school, but that's just my opinion.
Thank you. Councillor Reid followed by Councillor Sarwar.
Thank you, Convener. I think the last two questions have covered some of what I was going to ask. If a decision were made to close the school, would parents have the opportunity to transfer their own children to a school, whether it be a decant facility or just another school such as St John's, on the basis that if I were a parent and I thought my child's school was not fit for purpose, I would not want them to be there for the next 4 years?
I would presume parents would have that right to do that at any stage. Would that be the? Yeah. That would be the right of any parent in any school at any time. If they had any issues with the school, that would be their right to do that.
And there is the capacity in other schools to accommodate these children?
That varies from, I was going to say year to year. The reality is, Councillor Reid, that varies from week to week. Capacities are not static and change. So it's at any point in time, it's difficult to say categorically for any schools. Yes, there would be. It also depends on what age and stage the children are at. But the convener is quite right. At any point, any parent can make that decision to move their children to any other school. I think what I would want to say is that, picking up on the point about a decant and essential maintenance and that point as well, that if we got to the situation where we considered that it was unsafe for youngsters to remain in that school, then that's a different situation to the situation we're in now, and we would look at what alternatives were available, and that may or may not be some kind of decant. We have experience of, for example, of Canoe Primary School, whilst works were being undertaken there, the whole school being decanted to Inchview Primary. So we do have experience and there is precedent in terms of that kind of move. So we would need to look at that very carefully, but we would be seeking to ensure, as John said, that the school is maintained to an acceptable standard, which is maybe not the highest of standards, but nonetheless safe and legal and acceptable. And if that situation changed, then that's something that we would need to consider again and look at again.
For your reference, Councillor Reid, in 3.12 and 3.13 on page 47 of the report, there's quite a lot of detail about the current children in the catchment and where they go to, etc. Councillor Wilson and then Councillor Sharma.
This isn't a question, it's just to add to the points that have already been made. To some degree, parental choice has been made in some instances, not just in relation to St John's Primary, but other schools that might be sitting in, it might indeed be North Muirton. And that's where we are with the school role at the moment. So that process has gone on for some time. I think the parents whose children are still at Balhousie have made a positive decision to have them there for their education, and have accepted that the school building is not optimum in terms of provision, but that it is adequate, it's safe, and they're happy for their children to be there. And we must remember that the staff who are there are still providing an excellent service of education. We talk a lot about the buildings, but the reality is we've got very dedicated staff with good leadership in the school who are continuing to provide a good education. It may be not the optimum that we would provide because of the building's constraints on it, but it is still there. So the parents have made that choice, and they're free to make that choice both now and in the future.
Councillor Sarwar.
Thank you, Convener. My question is on 10.3 of the appendix, travel arrangements.
Could you give us the page reference? That would be helpful, thank you.
But whenever I scroll, I tend to lose it. 29. But it's the... In 10.3.1, it lists the approximate sort of extra minutes for school walking distance. I take it that there's obviously agreed some leeway in this depending on the age of the child and the busyness of that day. I see that in 10.3.3 we talks about a travel plan, and I just wondered what assurances could be given about the health and safety for the walk of children. Obviously there is the issue of traffic and pollution in this area in particular.
Ask Karen Robertson, please.
Thank you. As outlined within the report, the walking distances and in terms of maximum walking distances for primary school is set out within legislation. So the work that was done to assess the pupils in terms of where they live and what those times are approximate, and yes, some younger children might take slightly longer than older children, so that was to give an indication that it was within the distances that the law would determine as acceptable for primary school pupils, and our policy, certainly within Perth Kinross Council, is actually slightly more generous than the legislation requires us to be, because the law states that children under the age of 8 can be expected to walk up to 2 miles, and those over the age of 8 can be expected to walk up to 3 miles. And within our policy, we set that at primary school level. So they are approximate distances and timings, and these may alter depending on the age. However, in relation to the safety aspects that you raised, schools within Perth City, pupils are very well placed to walk to schools there. There is national guidance that is set out that determines where a walking route to school would be deemed to be safe or unsafe. And within Perth City Centre, where there are pavements, there are mechanical crossings, there are traffic speed limits of 30 miles an hour or less than that in some areas, would determine that within the city centre the walking routes would be acceptable and deemed safe walking routes. The point in terms of the pollution in relation to the Dunkeld Road side of the area, I mean, I think that is a point that would need to be looked at further as part of the more detailed travel plan if the proposal was to be accepted. But a number of the children who are attending Balhousie to get to Northmuirton would not necessarily be on that route on their journey to and from school.
Thank you. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I accept all the legal that has been looked into in that. I just wondered if there was any, it talks about a travel plan, and I presume that was maybe looking at new kind of active travel routes or perhaps looking at the pollution. I just wondered if there was any detail and assurances. I understand it's in the future, but we are making a decision today.
I would presume that, as with all our new schools and various other indeed all of our schools, the active travel plans and all the various safety mechanisms that would need to be built in around a school would be done along with colleagues from the roads department. Would that be correct? Thank you.
There is no detail because it's to be
Yeah. Councillor Wilson.
Just to add to that, thanks to Councillor Sarwar, what I think is a good question. If anything in the future travel plan begins to educate parents and that the love affair with the internal combustion engine need not be the only option of getting kids to school, then that will be a benefit in itself. Councillor Parrott is in the public gallery and he will know more about the area than I do because he's a local member, but because of the type of topography of the housing estates, there's quite a variety of different routes. I can think of 3 or 4 routes that you could go to Northmuirton Primary School from we can call it the Muirton area quite readily, and of course there's a very regular bus service as well, which I think my memory is right, it's a bus every 10 minutes that proceeds from right through the whole area, as I think you'll be aware, and practically doesn't quite pass the door of the current school, the new school, but it's so if it's a wet day, the bairns will be allowed to use the bus, in my opinion. But otherwise, I think there's plenty of routes for them to walk.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Unless there's any further questions, I'd like to move the report as it stands. This is a huge decision that we're taking, and I don't think any of us are taking it lightly. I was discussing with Mrs Giles the quantity of papers and the information that we have in front of us, and thank you to councillors for delving into some of the detail in the report, and to officers that have answered the questions. Having been at the public information sessions and the consultations at the 2 different schools, I'd like to at this point put on record my thanks to all the officers that have taken part in this process, and for the very detailed way in which they have conducted their discussions with members of the public in particular, and the huge amount of work that, should we approve the paper today, and then the various other different stages that have to be gone through, there will be a huge amount of work to be done over the next 4 years, Councillor Anderson, to get to the point of bringing these 2 communities together with a brand new state-of-the-art, ambitious school that is exactly what we want to see delivered for these 2 communities based at Northmuirton. So with that, I'd like to move the report and hopefully seek a seconder.
I'm happy to second the report, convener. I think that the recommendations contained within it are the right ones, and I'd just like to touch on a few reasons for that. I think there's the practical considerations. We clearly do need to do something about Balhousie Primary School to improve the condition and suitability of the educational environment that the children are experiencing who currently go to that school. As we discussed at the last committee, even with significant investment of between £4.8 and £5.7 million plus the decant costs of £600,000, even if we were to make all of this investment, we would only be able to bring the building up to condition B and suitability B. And that's not to mention the significant ongoing maintenance costs that are associated with the upkeep of an older building. So, as is set out in the report, it's not best value for the council to continue to pour money into this building when actually we could provide a significantly improved educational environment for those children who are attending there. As Councillor Duff and others have mentioned, Education Scotland have clearly set out that there are significant educational benefits to this proposal. The significantly improved facilities, not just for the pupils of Balhousie Primary School, but also the pupils of Northmuirton Primary School, will be very much welcome, I think, by the pupils that attend there, and should significantly improve their educational experience. I think it's also important to point out that, as Councillor Forbes has referred to, that while there have been objections from the majority of people who engaged with the consultation, there has not been a significant groundswell of support for continuing to keep Balhousie Primary School open. And I think that that's quite telling that actually that this proposal is the right way forward. I'd also like to touch on one of the things that was mentioned by the Executive Director when she introduced the report, about the fact that although the new school will be built in the Northmuirton area, given that this is the replacement for two schools, both Balhousie Primary School and Northmuirton Primary School, that this will be an entirely new school with a new identity. And I think what we've seen from Bertha Park, that there have been excellent work that's been done to engage pupils, and pupils are very excited about being able to form and shape an entirely new school with a new name, with a new uniform, with a new logo. So I think that's also something that these children, both from Balhousie Primary School and from Northmuirton Primary School, will very much enjoy being part of that process of shaping and forming the identity of an entirely new school. So for those reasons, I'm happy to support and second the paper that's before us today.
Can I ask if there are any comments on the report? Councillor Ribbick.
Thank you, Convener. We in the SNP group stated at the committee meeting of the 24th of January that we would oppose the closure of Balhousie Primary School vigorously and without apology. And I'm absolutely convinced that the formal consultation has been done professionally and diligently. I've no doubt about that. However, nothing that has come from that consultation has seen us change our mind or our position on it. The stakeholders and parents of Balhousie Primary School were opposed to it then, and they're opposed to it now. The formal consultation wasn't heavily supported, we appreciate, by parents, but it was because they'd already given their tuppence worth, and they did feel, rightly or wrongly, that it was a done deal anyway. And that is why, but the original consultation, the informal consultation, support was unanimous in opposition to the closure of the school. We're delighted in the SNP group that Northmuirton will get a new primary school. We're delighted with that wholeheartedly, and we accept the educational benefits that are underlined by Education Scotland and a new school for Northmuirton. But we reserve the right to argue for the refurbishment of the Old Northern District and now Balhousie Primary School. We made provision for it in our budget and will continue to be consistent in our opposition to the closure. And to that end, we would like to propose an amendment today, which I think Linda has. Thank you, Linda. I'll have to have it next week.
I ask if you have a seconder, Councillor Rubbick?
I hope so.
Thank you, Convener. The decision to close Balhousie Primary School and move pupils to North Muirton is more than just an added 20-minute walk. It is the removal of a core community asset in our inner city. It is robbing future generations of urban dwellers the chance to meet, grow and learn together in the city centre. If we truly want the best for Perth and for the minority and at times disadvantaged communities who live here, I believe we would be taking the opportunity to rebuild and redevelop Balhousie, not to close it. For these reasons and the many others raised by colleagues and those pupils and families affected by this closure, I second this amendment and urge others to vote with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Starwer. Can I ask if there's any contributions? Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Convener. I don't think any of us want to sit here and close schools. I'm certainly a strong advocate for keeping them open. I have been educated in multiple schools. I've visited dozens, and I have never visited a school or indeed a public building that was in the state that Balhousie was when I visited it in January. And in fact, I'm getting quite passionate about this. I do not believe children should be educated in that building at this moment in time. I didn't believe it then, and I would have us move them into decant if it was up to me. I think the school is of a Victorian age where it, was fit for purpose then. We are now 100 odd years on, and it no longer is fit for purpose. There is no proper grass, outside space, etc. And I strongly think that if we are to do what is in the best interest of the children, in terms of we would be putting them in as new school as soon as possible. I think that closing a school in a city is slightly different to closing it in a rural area. The distances we're talking about are not the same. I appreciate that it is a longer walking distance, and I absolutely take Councillor Sarwar's point that we are adding walking time onto children, but we are talking not the level of miles that we're talking in rural areas. It is not quite the same from my point of view, but I will be supporting the closure of Balhousie today on the basis that, as I've said, I do not believe it's a fit and proper environment for children now, and I think we owe it to them to give them a fit and proper environment for the future.
Thank you, Councillor McDade. I have Councillor Forbes and then Councillor Baird.
Thank you, Convener. I understand this is a listed building, and therefore what we can actually do to the building is probably fairly limited. For example, we could fix the leaky windows that Councillor Anderson told us about, and the plaster falling off the ceiling that Councillor McDade talked about too. But the reality is this is an old building. We probably can't do anything structurally to it, and by everyone's definition, this is not fit for purpose for modern education. This administration is offering a brand new school to serve these pupils. I think is absolutely the right thing to do. I don't think it's right that the SNP, as the SNP suggests, that we should educate our children in an old and substandard school, and I will absolutely be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Baird.
Thank you, Convener. I think it was back in 2015 that lifelong learning first started the school transformation. At that time, we all were aware that Balhousie was not in a good condition. Balhousie has not been in a good condition for years, and we have got the courage to do something which is going to right for the community. No one here has disputed the state of that building, and you cannot sometimes make something good out of something that's well past its sell-by date. These children, I'm sure, will enjoy being in a brand new school. I'm sure teachers will enjoy teaching in a brand new school. Education is not all just about the building, it's about what we can do to educate the children. So I fully support the motion that Balhousie should be closed.
Thank you, Councillor Baird. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Convener. Reading this report, it appears to me that it is biased towards the closure of Balhousie, and I'm not convinced with that by the arguments given. Financially, that it would be a better building a new double-stream school and closing Balhousie, but then it goes on to say 4+ years, which is a very vague timescale. Now, someone queried my £140,000, £876,000 thing. Well, this is 4 times 35,000, and already we've been told that another 100,000 had to be committed to it, plus 17 already, and we're not, since the last committee meeting, we're not even a year down the road. So that's £117,000 has been invested in it already. And I'm quite sure that if we're going to go 4+ years, the amount we'll end up spending on it will be so much that it's going to be quite a spend on something that perhaps if we looked at a refurb, it would end up far better than waiting this 4+ years on a shiny new school that has been pointed out to us that the children that were, its parents were involved in the consultation won't even be there. It'll be another set of children there. And they might be at the further end of the thing. So the paragraph mentioning how far the children, the majority of the children won't have to travel this 1.2 miles. Well, that too, similar to the consultation, is here and now, but in 4 years that would be totally different. Secondly, a better quality of education is provided by a double-stream school. That appears to be what's being said here. Well, I've never set eyes on any evidential report to support that statement, that double stream is better than any of the others. And I personally feel that both single stream and composite schools in our area, especially the rural areas, has been a disservice by suggesting that a double stream form of education is the way forward. Also, the majority of feedback is against this option, and their views should not be dismissed, but taken into view. So, therefore, I would support the motion, the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Mr. McCall.
I'd first of all like to thank the officers for producing this light bedtime reading for the past few nights. It's kept me up. It's been riveting. I would like to say that there's two aspects to what impacts student education. There's the teaching and there's the environment. And I know, coming from St John's, when it was closed, we moved into the new school, that the environment has a very significant impact. It affects behaviour, it affects the way you see your school, the pride of your school, the pride of learning. And I think that while the teachers are no doubt delivering brilliant education, that would be enhanced in a new school. And while there is stuff like walking distances, I don't think that warrants subjecting pupils to many years in a building in such a degraded state. And I think that any chance to benefit education at all should be taken, even with the costs stated. Because frankly, I don't think those costs are high enough to say that we shouldn't give them a better education and a better school.
Thank you, Mr. McCall. Any further contributions to the debate? Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. Many points have been mentioned already, but I'm in favour of the closure, not because I want to see schools being closed, but because I think we've got to look at what is the optimum for young people in the future. Councillor Anderson mentioned the majority feedback was against. The majority feedback on this has been silent, if we're being blunt about it, both in terms of the community. Yes, 117k is a lot to spend in a school, but we were asked earlier on for an assurance that the school would be kept wind and watertight and safe. And that's what's happened with that expenditure, and that's what will happen until it's closed. 4 years may seem a long time. It takes up to 2 years to plan the detail of a new school and up to 2 years to build it. I think we've heard that and I think there's been preliminary work done on the new school at North Muirton. I'll not call it the new North Muirton school, but the new school at North Muirton. Preliminary work already done, so we're not starting off from scratch in that. And I'm hopeful that that timetable could be maintained. Councillor Sarwar mentioned the 20-minute walk. It's a 20-minute total walk. It might be 10 minutes as the current walk. It might be in a different direction. But that was the maximum. So, and we are promoting healthy walking. I've already explained there are options for the routes for walking and options for public transport for healthy access to the school. I simply don't think doing up current Balhousie is good value for money. And again, Councillor Sarwar said we don't want our disadvantaged communities getting second-rate facilities. If we spend what is up to £6 million on doing up Balhousie, we will end up with a second-rate school and something that will not enhance anybody, whether they're disadvantaged or otherwise. So, Convener, I'm quite resolute in my opinion that we should continue with the closure.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. In summing up before we move to the vote, I would just like to thank everyone for the contributions. Mr McCall, I think yours was particularly poignant, having gone to a school that was very similar in design to Balhousie, and then moved into the new environment at the North Inch campus is particularly poignant for myself. That's exactly what we want the children who are currently at Balhousie to be able to say in a few years' time. That, you know, that they have valued being put, you know, having the opportunity to be taught in that really special environment that we can progress and offer. And I would ask if we can move to the vote, please.
In terms of the Council's standing orders, only the councillors and the religious reps are entitled to vote. Councillors, we have before us, we're on item number 6, report number 18349, statutory consultation, Balhousie Primary School. We have a motion by Councillor Shire, seconded by Councillor Purvis, to move the recommendations contained in the report. We have an amendment by Councillor Rebeck, seconded by Councillor Sarwar, which reads, on the basis of the feedback that supported strongly the retention of Balhousie Primary School and on the contention that no strong case has been made that the benefits to education promised at North Muirton could not, with proper resources, be provided at Balhousie Primary School, it is recommended that the committee notes the contents of the consultation report attached as Appendix A and approves the following proposals. Education provision at Balhousie Primary School should be continued beyond 31st of July 2022 and options for its full refurbishment should be investigated. Both North Muirton and Balhousie Primary School catchment areas should remain unchanged. North Muirton Primary School should be rebuilt with capacity as appropriate to the North Muirton catchment area. When I call out your name, please tell me if you're voting for the motion or the amendment. Councillor Henry Anderson.
Amendment.
Councillor Kathleen Baird. Councillor John Duff.
Motion.
Councillor Angus Forbes.
Motion.
Councillor Zandra McDade.
Motion.
Councillor Tom McEwen.
Amendment.
Councillor Stuart Donaldson.
Amendment.
Councillor Callum Purvis.
Motion.
Councillor John Rebeck.
Amendment.
Councillor Crawford Reid.
Motion.
Councillor Fiona Sarwar. Councillor Caroline Shires.
Motion.
Councillor Willie Wilson.
Motion.
Mrs Pat Giles. The motion is carried 9 votes to 5.
Thank you, councillors. Just as a comment, I would just like to say that this is quite a big decision, a huge decision for two communities. There are further stages in this process that have to be gone through, but it's to offer the commitment and promise of the administration that we will do everything we can if we are, you know, if the ultimate conclusion is that we, following the next stages in the process, that we will work with the two communities to ensure that we do deliver this new school for the two communities of North Muirton and Balhousie. Thank you. So moving on to paper 7, and after paper 7 I'm going to propose that we take a short comfort break, largely because we're all melting up here. So I think the heating in here's gone haywire today. So after paper 7 we will have a comfort break. The paper before you is the statutory consultation on Forteviot Primary School. By its very nature, this is a different paper, although similar in detail, given that it's a rural community as opposed to a school in the city. The young people from Forteviot have been receiving their education for some time now at Forgandenny Primary School and are very settled there. Forgandenny has a newly appointed head teacher and has a vibrant community around it, made up of people from Forgandenny and Forteviot. I'd like to thank the officers for all they've done to investigate if a sustainable role could be established for Forteviot, but this report clearly demonstrates that that has not been possible. I was very pleased to attend the various consultation events and public meeting in the community and to hear the discussions about the futures for both communities, which were very positive, and the detail about the thriving school in Forgandenny, which services both of them now, and also the opportunity that the school site at Forteviot may play in developing the future of the village. And I'll pass over to the Executive Director to introduce the report.
Thank you. By means of formal introduction to the report, I would like to say that in January 2018, this committee considered the options appraisal for Forteviot Primary School. The findings of that report concluded that the preferred option was to close Forteviot Primary. It was agreed that formal consultation was to be undertaken to allow consideration to be given to the closure proposal by key stakeholders and interested parties. The outcome and findings from the consultation have now been reported and published in the consultation report along with Education Scotland report. The Council's proposal for Forteviot Primary School has received no opposition. The report from Education Scotland acknowledges that the proposal would lead to clear educational benefits for all pupils concerned. The report prepared demonstrates that we have put in place a robust approach in meeting our legislative requirements and fully considering the educational and social benefits to current and future pupils. Today, this committee is being asked to consider and approve the proposal to permanently close Forteviot Primary School.
Thank you, Sheena. Can I ask if there's any questions on the report? Councillor Baird.
Thank you very much. Just a question on the catchment area. Will there be a consultation now on that area? I know that Forteviot and Forgandenny are going to be the one catchment area, but does anybody else have to be consulted, or does it just now become, what, if we make a decision to close the school, that's the end of the process? Or is it more consultation?
My understanding of the process is that by taking this decision, one of the things that we are asking is that the catchments of Forteviot and Forgandenny are combined as one, so there would be no need for formal consultation beyond this point, but I'm sure Karen will tell me. No, I'm getting a nod, so that's correct.
Any further questions? No. Well, in moving the report, I'm not going to very much more than I have already, only this has been another interesting process of discussion and dialogue with two communities, Forgandenny and Forteviot, that's got us to this place, and we're very much looking forward to taking Forgandenny Primary School forward as a thriving village community school for the two communities, and it is great to see and hear from parents that children have, gone there and settled so well, because that really would be what we would all hope for. So I'd be happy to move the report on that basis and ask if I have a seconder.
Convener, I'd be happy to second the motion and the proposal and the paper. This is a different situation, very different from Balhousie, because in effect, parental choice has made this almost happen before the council proceeded with statutory procedures to review the situation. That been going on for some period of time, and I think one of the telling things in this report is the view in both from the parents and from the children and from Education Scotland of the balance of benefit of the bairns being in the school at Forgandenny, and the opportunity there to enjoy a learning environment that Forgandenny has been able to provide. Partly to do with the scale, partly because of the range of opportunities that are available in a slightly larger but still very rural and appropriate school. There is a wee bit of travel issue, but I think the educational benefit outweighs that, and I'm happy to second the report.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Can I ask if there's any comments on the report? Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Convener. This, as Councillor Wilson has just said, this is an entirely easier decision than the one we've just made. And as he quite rightly pointed out, the decision is pretty much already made anyway. But I would just like to make a short comment on page 132, where a paragraph refers to the close proximity to Strathallan School and how the opportunities are there for pupils to participate in a range of after-school clubs. And I do have concerns that once the Scottish Government have finished with their Barclay review, that organisations like Strathallan may well look again at those opportunities. I certainly hope that's not the case.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's truly a sad day for rural education. Sadly, the future of Forteviot was cast back in 2008, when a decision was made to take children from a rural environment and populate them in a new shiny school in Perth City. If decisions back then had been given to these children for a rural education, then perhaps Forteviot would still be a successful primary school here today, rather than being mothballed. Again, similar to the last item, the initial report in my mind was very negative, and once in the public domain, the school roll dropped from 14 to 3 in 1 year, with placement requests being made, making it the mothballing of it inevitable, and this has led to where we are at the moment, looking at full closure. This is a lesson to us that if we are to support rural education, these reports should be accurate as possible without alarming parents when the actual state of the building and the quality of education may need additional funding is very adequate. I would also ask our property subcommittee to ensure that if the community of Forteviot come forward with a sustainable plan for the school, every effort to accommodate their ambitions will be realised. I am sure we will have our vice conveners or whatever deeply regretting this decision, but claiming what else could be done. The decision was of the last administration. Didn't we have an opposition then? What motions or what objections was raised in the support of rural education? Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Wilson, were you? No.
No. I've already spoken.
I would challenge you about your comments about the inaccuracy of officers' reports. It's certainly not been my experience in this local authority. I think that is what you said. For the record, Councillor Anderson, that is in fact what you said. And it's my understanding, were you not in administration at that time? But we'll not go there. Councillor
That's what I said. But I wasn't on lifelong learning at that time.
But surely you would have influence with your party anyway. We'll move on. Councillor Rebeck.
Thank you. Thank you, Convener. It's just, sorry, a little digress point, but it won't be that started it if I can be so petty. I'm delighted that the Scottish Government actually can distinguish in the light of the Barclay Commission a charity and a business. Strathallan do indeed offer great facilities to the public, as I know from personal experience to the Bridgerend Football Club. They do it because we pay them, not out of the goodness of their heart.
I'm not sure that's exactly what's referred to in the paper. I think it's a voluntary arrangement between Strathallan School and because they want to support the local community school and they have resources that are available. In this instance, Councillor Rebeck. Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Convener. I do think it is sad anytime we have to close any school, and particularly a rural school where it is often the last public building, and I think there is an onus on the council to ensure that these buildings do not sit and lie for years and years to become derelict and a whole set of other problems for those communities. I think there is an onus on the council, and I would urge the council to find uses for these buildings, to work with the communities to find uses for these buildings, to ensure that they don't become eyesores and blots on the landscape, and also can foster stronger communities. And I think we have a number around Perth and Kinross already where we need to be looking to find uses for those buildings, and I hope that we will do so here in Forteviot as well.
Councillor McDade, Straloch Primary School is in my ward, so I'm well aware of the frustration of a community when a building has sat for so long. But I'm delighted that our officers are working with the community to progress options. Do you have any further comments, or can we move? You've had one, Councillor Beda. Was that a question? Sorry, I'm sorry, I apologise.
I asked the question. Yes, it is sad when a rural school actually does close, but these children have been going to Forteviot now for 2 years. They're well integrated and they see themselves as one. They'd gone there before for after school activities, so they don't see them as a separate area. And as far as the relationship with Strathallan, they work really closely, and Strathallan work happily in the community. They help in the village hall in both Forteviot and Forteviot. And as for Forteviot being the only public building in Forteviot, that is not quite true. They do have a village hall which the community strive to keep going, and they have the local church there. So closing the school is not going to be the end of a community. But my plea is also about the building. No, I don't want it boarded up, because I went through the pain of Abernethy having their school boarded up for many, many years, and also Kinross. So I think the council have learned that we must move forward and hope the community or someone else will take on the building and make it still a pretty building in a lovely rural village.
Thank you, Councillor Baird. I agree completely. I would say that our officers, and obviously legislation has moved on now in terms of community asset transfer, etc. And we have very active officers who work with communities, and that is an element of Scottish Government policy that I'm very glad to welcome, because it has definitely dealt with an issue that has been a problem for rural communities. Any further comments, or can we agree the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. I'm going to propose a very brief 5-minute comfort break, if that's okay, because we're very hot up here.
It's unusual.
Thank you, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. We'll now move on to paper 8, and I'm going to hand over to Councillor Purvis.
Thank you, Convener. Paper 8 is on the digital strategy for education and children's services. This paper sets out a proposed strategy for the development of digital literacy, digital skills, and the use of technology in our schools over the next few years up until 2021. I'll ask Sheena Devlin, the Executive Director, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I'll start with a quote from a recent paper that the team have read, which states that for the UK to be a world-leading digital economy that works for everyone, it is crucial that everyone has the digital skills that they need to fully participate in that society. This report informs committee regarding Education and Children's Services vision for the development of digital literacy, learning and skills in our schools and other learning establishments over the next 3 years. The strategy outlines the overarching aims, how success will be measured, and the responsibilities of all involved. The action plan details how we will work with schools, with parents and others, and with our colleagues in corporate IT to ensure that this vision for our young people is realised. Given the ever-changing nature of the development of digital technology, Education and Children's Services will remain flexible and open to reviewing its strategic digital approaches to ensure that we continue to meet the needs of learners within a wider local, national and global context. I would like to provide reassurance for committee that what we are proposing here is not a replacement of all other learning through digital means, but rather using digital technologies appropriately to support and enhance learning and teaching in all of our schools. And to conclude, I just want to say that I believe it's essential that we prepare our children and young people for their future and not for our past.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions on the report? Councillor McEwen.
I find this report very, very good and very invigorating. I know it's connectivity, etc., is a hot topic between all 3 political branches in our society and our communities. But I think this report is very positive and identifies correctly the needs of our communities. Obviously living in a rural area and in an area which has a SIN rating down at 1 and 2 for some of our people's areas. Well, the rollout of this will have challenges, and decisions will have to be made by the council and by officers about where the connectivity would be rolled out first, and most importantly, and then that money getting put in. I'd like to have some sort of understanding of whether any areas where our attainment gap is wider, etc., would be prioritised to get IT services put in, or whether we're going to do the easy jobs first and leave these more difficult areas and difficult challenges till last.
Thank you very much for the many points that you raised there, Councillor McEwen. I think the issue of equity of access is really at the heart of what you're talking about there, and that's something that we are very conscious of. I'm pleased that I've got Eleanor Paul along with us, and Eleanor is a Quality Improvement Officer within the Secondary and Inclusion team who's leading on this particular strategy, and Eleanor and others have been working very closely with our colleagues in corporate IT, because we recognise that the two parts of this that need to go as seamlessly together as possible is about the infrastructure and then about the learning and teaching approaches. So if you don't mind, I'll ask Eleanor just to say a wee bit about the work perhaps that's been undertaken or is planned to be undertaken in relation to that.
Good afternoon. We have done an extensive audit of all schools about their connectivity, their Wi-Fi issues, their broadband, and what they're looking to improve. So we have, from that information, looked at property works that are planned and the various quality of connectivity in the schools, and have come up with a comprehensive plan over the next 3 years to deal with all of these issues, to bring all of the schools to be fit for purpose with connectivity.
I think you also asked Councillor McCune about where we would start and the areas for priority. So Eleanor or Roger, I don't know if you could say something about that, please.
Thank you, Councillor McCune, for your question. In terms of priorities, we have used the audit to identify those at the top of the first, which needs to be addressed first, and those are the ones with poor connectivity, which could impact on learning and teaching. So those are the key criteria, some of the key criteria to look at: the equipment, the connectivity, and the resource within the school to allow high quality learning and teaching to take place.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor McCune?
It does, and obviously we have other papers coming about attainment gap and spending of PIF money, etc. And I think the connectivity plays into that, because some of the solutions that the head teachers want to use involves IT, it involves connectivity, it involves all these things. So it's all joined up.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions on the report? Councillor McDade, to be followed by Councillor Rebeck.
I have two questions, so if I can ask them in two separate parts, please. The first question is, obviously we have, as we know, a very vast school estate across Perth and Kinross. I think somewhere in the region of 80 plus schools, and they have to varying degrees levels of technology, and are going to have further expansion of that technology. And as a councillor, and I've got Councillor Duff, who also represents our ward, the most remote ward in Perth and Kinross, where significant parts of the population cannot access any broadband whatsoever. I'm concerned about the idea that, and this was raised at a meeting that the former council chief executive and I held in Kinlochrannoch last year, where children cannot do their homework because it requires being online and they have not got that facility. So my question is, could the council look at ways of opening up council buildings out of hours to allow children and others who are undertaking further and higher education locally to utilise those council buildings and the facilities that they have out with school hours?
Ms Devlin.
Thank you. I know the area well. I was the service manager for all the schools across all of Highland Perthshire, so I understand about the connectivity issues there, and I recognise that well, we had one school that was until very recently able to be at the same level as the others in that area, and I'm pleased to say that there is now a degree of connectivity for all of them. Your point about, again, it's an equity issue, isn't it, about expectations of youngsters perhaps being able to do things out with school time. And your suggestion there in terms of use of buildings to support that is certainly one that we will look into and try and understand how that might work and how we can make best use of that. It also for me then begs the question about what kind of homework is expected given particular restrictions, and so that's something that we would certainly want to look at.
Thank you. And you had a second question, Councillor McDade.
Yes, thank you, and I'm glad to hear that response. So my second question is around the virtual campus. And having studied UHI and having been a student rep at UHI, I'm fully aware that digital resources are not and cannot be a replacement for traditional teaching methods, and certainly not if you want to see the level of attainment that you get from traditional teaching methods. But it is a positive step forward in terms of having additional ways for learning and additional ways for the teacher to give pupils information. But one of my queries is around in terms of are we looking actively at putting video conference facilities into schools so that we can use traditional teaching methods to deliver to a wider audience traditional subjects essentially, and using the Glow etc. platforms as additional add-ons to that to support that, which is basically how universities, colleges etc. are utilising those methods, including UHI, and it's quite well established. And as part of that, we could also, again, I come back to my first sort of question here, we could utilise those facilities after out-school hours for further and higher education and provide that lifelong aspect, we are called the Lifelong Learning Committee, to those communities.
I'll ask Eleanor to just, and Roger, to give you a bit more information about the virtual learning environment and the kind of approach being taken there. I'm very aware of the facilities through UHI because, of course, we now have our BEd course running there, and a number of the participants in that make use of Blackboard and all the rest of it. And so we would want to be looking at ultimately the development of connectivity across all partners, and of course the way to do that is you need to have systems that speak to one another and that allow people to be able to do that. That of course comes with significant investment, and there was quite significant investment made in the last capital budget to support the whole IT infrastructure in the context of learning and education in the broadest sense. There's not a huge roadmap yet for that, but this is one of the first parts of that. So I'm absolutely with you in terms of there is a need to look at how do we ensure that we're not only able, if you like, to speak virtually within the council, but to others. And there are some very good examples actually across Scotland, across the Western Isles, in terms of Gaelic provision, for example. Much of that is done through exactly that kind of approach, and I know that colleagues in Education and Children's Services have been meeting with colleagues who organise, run and participate in that e-learning environment in the promotion of Gaelic and mainstream subjects through the medium of Gaelic. So that's something we're interested in as well for a number of reasons. But I'll ask Roger and Eleanor just to tell you a wee bit more.
Yes, absolutely is the answer. We are looking at video conferencing. We are looking at all of the tools that are available to us from Scottish Government through Glow to improve the learning and teaching experiences of all of our young people across our school estate. So it's everyone. And really working with young groups of learners who are looking to access subjects that they can't access at present, and also looking at ways of improving the workflow system for all classes. So it's a very exciting time, and it's moving ahead very quickly because tools such as Microsoft 365 and Glow are having adaptations all the time, which are adding video conferencing, and it's really expanding at a vast rate. So very exciting, and as the Executive Director said, we are working closely with other authorities throughout Scotland to make sure that we are in line with and learning from the other learning that's going on in Scotland.
Okay, thank you.
There was perhaps just one other thing that may be of interest in that Convener and I have had a discussion about the use of, obviously in our context it's Education and Children's Services assets, buildings, in respect of how they might serve differently local communities as well as serving the purpose of schools, and that's something that we have discussions at an early stage, but we're planning to take further forward.
Thank you. Councillor Rebeck to be followed by Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Just a quick question. I hope it's not petty. It's not meant to be. On page 4 of the report and page 187 of today's papers, just in the first paragraph, about 6 lines down, it says that general broadband provision and Wi-Fi coverage in some of our more remote areas, which is the responsibility of the Scottish Government. Regrettably, I think it's the responsibility of the UK Government, but I would like to seek clarity on that.
Okay, we'll seek clarification on that and we'll make any amendment that's necessary.
Thank you.
Rebeck. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I have two fairly straightforward, quick questions. Following up on Councillor McEwen's first question, delighted to see that there's some work being done to get the Wi-Fi and the broadband speeds up, and it says this will be completed by 2020. So my first question is, are we on schedule for 2020?
Ms. Paul?
Yes, absolutely we are. We have worked very successfully with our colleagues in IT corporate team to put together a plan for that, and have indeed invested some additional resourcing into the team that are undertaking the property work to ensure that it takes place on time. And we're undergoing work, for example, at Portmoak Primary School at the moment to make sure that all the schools have the work done as planned and on schedule.
Thank you. And your second question, Councillor
Thank you for that. Vice Convener, I'll happily withdraw this question if you feel it's not relevant to the business of the day, but I'm on page 186 of the report, and there's a reference to the app Seesaw. Now, not familiar with this, but I'm wondering if this is the app that was subject to some, trying to think of a delicate way to put this, no, it's not. Okay, I will withdraw the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Do we have any further questions on the report? No? Okay. Well, I'm very happy to move this report today. I think it's very exciting that we're establishing this digital strategy to take us up to 2021, and the fact that it covers all areas, including looking at the capital investment that's required, improving our connections, but also in terms of the professional development of staff to allow them to get more experience about different teaching methods that can be done through digital means. Eleanor Paul was very kind and took me through GLOW, which is the system that is being used to deliver many of these digital learning methods. Now, I remember GLOW from when I was at school, which was not that long ago, and I was very concerned when I heard that it was GLOW that was the method that we were using to deliver some of these things, because I think that the one that I was used to was designed to be used through a dial-up connection, and its functionality was extremely limited. However, it's gone through extensive redevelopment and changes, and the second version of GLOW, I was extremely impressed by the functionality that has, including integration of Microsoft Office and the ability to integrate lots of different applications to be used directly through GLOW. And that and other technologies will allow us to deliver some of the exciting things in this strategy, including, as has already been mentioned, the virtual campus, which I'm very keen to see once the pilot has been completed. And we've looked at what the best means of delivering expanded subject choice and expanded levels of subjects in all our schools across Perth and Kinross, how this new digital learning strategy will allow us to enhance the learning offering to all of our pupils. So I'm very happy to move this paper today and move the digital learning strategy. Do I have a seconder?
Vice Convener, indeed you do. I only have a nanosecond of hesitancy given Councillor McDade's earlier remark about something being Victorian. I think I'm probably the nearest to something being Victorian in the room. However, we'll move rapidly on from there. Yeah? There was a lot of good things happened in the Victorian era, Councillor McEwen, as you won't remember, but I'm sure you can read about the history. I think there's several things about this strategy. First of all, I've been critical in the past, Convener, and Vice Convener, about and councillors about us having strategyitis. There's three things about this strategy that are important. One is it's essential, two, it's useful, and three, it's short. It covers about half a dozen pages, and not only that, but it has a commendable, short, understandable, and I think attainable action plan attached to it, which is what is really, really important, because all of these strategies will rely on staff and colleagues and schools being able to implement whatever that strategy is. It is important for our continued learning. We need to make absolute maximum use of all the IT facilities that are available to us, and I'm very happy to second the report.
Thank you, Vice Convener Wilson. Do we have any comments on the report? We'll start with Councillor McDade, to be followed by Councillor Rebek.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I think that it is a very good report, and actually I would agree with Councillor Wilson. It is mercifully to the point, and that's a welcome report in my book. And I think from my point of view, the report mentions at one point that basically teachers are trying to keep up with the children they're teaching in terms of the technology use. And I think actually as a council, we are way behind where technology is at, and actually we're falling behind potentially other educational establishments, not necessarily comparators in terms of councils, but we are behind universities, colleges, and the wider sector who have leaped ahead in recent years, and UHI has been overtaken by other universities and colleges who all have systems that talk to each other, etc. So I think there is a lot that we can buy into basically just by buying it in, and that's a good thing because we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think from what Councillor Purvis has mentioned earlier in terms of I look forward to the virtual campus coming on leaps and bounds in terms of expanded subject choice and giving that parity that the Exec Director talked about earlier for the rural areas in particular in terms of subject choice, having wanted to do numbers of subjects that weren't offered locally because of demand, such as higher economics, advanced higher business management, things like that, which we could offer potentially through this setup. And I think that can only be a positive thing for our young people going forward. So I think it's a good strategy. I think I'm looking forward to seeing, hearing back feedback as it develops. And I just put my plea in for, let's supercharge it and get it going even faster.
Thank you, Councillor McDade. Councillor Rebek.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Again, I frequently plagiarise our Executive Director's comments when parents ask me why kids are getting iPads and not sitting at their desk all day learning the 3 R's and getting the chalk thrown at them and stuff like that. And I'm stereotyping, of course. And what she says is that we should prepare our kids for their future, not our past. And that absolutely sums it all up. And this paper goes some way towards getting there with that. I accept that we're getting there slowly, maybe, but we are getting there, and the paper's to be commended. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McCall.
I'd like to welcome this report. It's brilliant to see that our schools will have some of the best opportunities to maximise their use of technology. I would urge caution, however, on basing education after tertiary institutions. I think that the research behind lecture recording is exceptionally inconclusive, the good research that is. And I would say that if we're going to base it after tertiary institutions, then we're going to lose a lot of the support and the real understanding that sometimes is self-directed in tertiary institutions, and maybe it's too young quite often in secondary or primary education for that.
Thank you. Do you have any further comments on the report?
I'll go for a second one. Absolutely, I agree with Mr. McCall, and that was what I said actually, that the evidence does say that you cannot actually replace the thing, and I think that's absolutely what we should take from it, and take from the fact that hundreds of people don't turn up to the lecture and then they fail. So absolutely, we've got to learn that lesson, and we need to take that forward. And good news is we've got all the research and we can just take it from there. So absolutely agree with this comment.
Glad you covered that, Councillor McDade, because I was considering going through a game theory example of how we prove that point. Can we agree the paper? Agreed. Thank you.
Okay, councillors, we're now on to item 9, the Raising Attainment Strategy Update 2018. My previous remarks do not apply to this paper in terms of length. However, this is at the very core of what we're about. This is the very fundamentals of what we're here, is raising attainment. It's a very full report, it's a very detailed report. We asked for a full and detailed report as a committee, and we certainly have got it. I'm sure there will be plenty of questions, but before that, I'll ask the Executive Director to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. just want to say I was so pleased to hear the comments from our Vice Convener about his experience most recently of glow, and it reminded me that all that glisters is not gold and all those glitches are not glow. But
your pre-Christmas
yeah,
message.
yeah. However, onto the serious business of the Raising Attainment strategy, and I will just change slightly the introduction that I intended to give. This is a report that previously, in years gone by, would have come under the auspices of the Attainment report, and it restricted itself solely to data about attainment of youngsters in Perth and Kinross. Times move and legislation moves and requirements move, and we move with those times. And the report that you have before you, which is lengthy and which is detailed, represents the Council's annual report that we submit to the Scottish Government, which demonstrates the progress that we are making in delivering the priorities of the National Improvement Framework for Scottish education. We did provide a briefing session for elected members on the contents of this report, and that was held on the 24th of October. I do now appreciate, however, that there was another briefing session that was lengthy that day as well. And so I think there's something for us to look at in terms of the timing of these sessions for you all, so that we're trying to manage them in a more appropriate way for you and breaking them up. But this report does provide an update on the Raising Attainment Strategy 2016-2019. It describes progress on a range of performance measures from early years to post-school participation, and also describes progress of improvements. What we have done, which we hope is helpful, is provide an executive summary, because we genuinely are mindful that this is a long and detailed report. And in that executive summary, there are performance highlights and areas for improvement that are there in a quick, easy read, we hope. And whilst we continue to demonstrate that good progress is being made in many measures, we absolutely recognise that there remains room for improvement in a number of important areas. And as such, education officers will continue to provide support and challenge to schools in our shared endeavour of achieving the best possible outcomes that we can for all of our children and young people.
Thank you. I think it was Councillor McEwen who correctly said a few minutes ago that these three papers, 8, 9 and 10, are clearly linked together. This sets the scene for the strategy, and in fact the digital process, if we put it as bluntly as this, is a methodology of attaining better attainment, and obviously the Pupil Equity Fund and other associated funding is one way of achieving the resources to do that. So we go on to questions. Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Just flicking through this to page 214, and I notice a reference to the Scottish National Standardised Assessments. I understand this is the P1 testing that... Sorry? Oh, sorry.
I think he sneezed.
Oh, sorry, okay. I understand this is the P1 testing that went through Parliament, and I think John Swinney has now just announced a review of it. And I wondered if there was any specific information for Perth and Kinross on that.
Thank you very much. In relation to the standardised assessments, the Scottish National Standardised Assessments, the SNSAs, I'm happy to provide a committee with some information as to how we have taken the approach here in Perth and Kinross, and how that has been received and experienced in the lessons that we've learned from year one of implementation. As many of you might know, Perth and Kinross was one of the few local authorities that didn't have an approach across all schools of using standardised assessments. That wasn't to say that we didn't have schools who did use that approach. In terms of our experience, I'm going to just share with you some factual information that we have garnered through our Short Life Working Group and our ongoing evaluation of this new process for us, because for the 3 local authorities who hadn't previously used standardised assessments, we were in a different position to many who had. The overall experience across Perth and Kinross has been a positive one. Some schools have reported that the technical expectations, particularly in relation to primary ones, were quite demanding, and that additional technical support was required. Teachers being teachers have found many ways around that, and actually when iPads were used, that is much less of an issue. And so one of the points of learning is that schools will be using iPads to undertake the assessments on, which is perfectly acceptable. We received no reports of any pupils becoming distressed whilst undertaking the assessments. Schools were well prepared, and we have two members of teaching staff from school here who I know would be happy to contradict me if I say anything that they don't agree with. Schools were well prepared, and we did work closely with colleagues, not just in schools, but also specifically with our colleagues through the JNCT, our teaching, professional teachers associations, on our plans for this, our training for staff for this, and our implementation. Administering all assessments in primary schools, so I'm not just now talking about P1, because the assessments are undertaken at P1, P4 and P7, was felt to be quite demanding in terms of access to the IT equipment that was necessary. And so again, that's a learning point for us in terms of how schools can adjust their programme of undertaking these assessments to best suit their individual needs. The SNSA data from last session has been used at school and class level alongside other assessment information, and it's been used to support wider discussions on pupil attainment and progress. The feedback we have had from staff is that it has been helpful in terms of supporting teacher judgments and the other range of assessments that are undertaken with pupils. We've consulted with head teachers and trade unions on the administration of the assessments this year, and we've sought feedback on how that has gone, and that again has been a discussion and a subject of discussion that we've had at our JNCT meetings, which has been very positive, and we have been listening to the feedback there, and that has all been taken into account for the planning for next session. To be quite specific with you, in terms of feedback from parents, we have to date, across all of Perth and Kinross, only received requests from 6 parents of P1 pupils who have asked that their children do not undertake the assessments. In terms of percentages of youngsters who have undertaken the assessments, in primary one it's 98% of our young people, and at other stages it's 95%. The reason that youngsters might not undertake an assessment over and above if there's a parental request could be their additional support needs would determine that it was not appropriate to do at particular stages. And that's always been the case, and teachers make that judgment all the time, and sometimes it was around absence of pupils at the time when those particular assessments were being undertaken. We know that there was a statement made recently in Parliament advising that there is now going to be a commission on independent review of the approaches of primary 1 assessments, and we would welcome that, and we are very happy to participate in that in any way that would be supportive and helpful. Our plans are to continue learning from the information that we've gathered through the extensive consultation that's taken to date so far, and that we will continue with the administering of the SNSAs across our schools until such time as we receive information that would not be appropriate to do.
Thanks, Executive Director, for that update. I think that was useful for all the committee. Are there any supplementary questions on that subject that anybody wants to raise just now? Okay, thank you. We'll go on then to general questions on the report. Councillor Sarwar.
Thank you, Vice Convener. My question is on page 4, and then I'll probably jump down to page 7. I just wanted to say thank you to officers for making themselves available for the briefing that we had. I think it was helpful. I think it's very clear that it's early days, and that was made clear to us, and that the information is, we'll need a lot more data before we can fully analyse. But from my understanding of the report that was given and what's in front of us, there has been an awareness that the levels of numeracy and writing are perhaps not where we would like them to be in P4 and P7. And I think that is addressed on page 7. I'm scrolling slowly. And that this will be a continued focus for 18-19, and that there are some strategies coming into place there. I just wondered if a bit could be said about what you've seen in terms of the gaps specifically and how that's being addressed.
think in terms of that level of detail, it's probably better that I hand over to Sharon Johnson and Roger Hill, who will be able to cover those points.
Thank you, Councillor. We did mention at the briefing that we gave to you that we were in early days in terms of our analysis of the gaps. But what we do know is that there has been a dip across primary 4 in all areas, but in particular numeracy and writing, and we gave some indication of what we know to date around that. In terms of writing, boys do less well than girls, and we know that that's the case. So one of the things that we're doing is to look at how we further engage and use the curriculum to engage boys better in writing. Numeracy across the piece is also a challenge, and one of the benefits that we've had in terms of the use of SNSA this year is that we've been able to look across classes and schools to see which areas of the numeracy curriculum that children are struggling with the most. And one of the key pieces of advice and information that we're able to share now with class teachers and head teachers is ways in which we need to develop our teaching of numeracy. We have a numeracy health strategy that we've developed this year, and we're also participating in a numeracy hub, and we've got a lot of individual schools looking at their individual gaps with their pupils and looking at interventions that they want to try out with their pupils.
Could I just add to that, Councillor Sarwar, that you'll see within the work of the Regional Improvement Collaborative, numeracy is one of the areas that we've identified across Dundee, Angus, Perth and Kinross as something that requires a closer look, and it's one of the main work streams there. And what we've been able to do across the piece then is do that kind of micro look at the data in individual schools, and the SNSA data, Sharon says, has helped us do that, so that what we're not doing is a general approach to numeracy improvement, but rather a much more targeted and appropriate approach. And so the work of the numeracy substream is a really important one. What it doesn't mean is that we're all starting from the same point, and we're not, but it does show that regardless of what our starting point is across the 3 different areas, there is a need to make improvements there, and we do feel that we're better working together on that, and that is one of the benefits that we are experiencing at present.
Mr. Hill, are you would add anything to that? Or?
I would merely reinforce my colleague's comments to say that yes, the numeracy remains an area of focus, and it has been raised with all the secondary head teacher group, and numeracy is improving, but slower than we would like, so we need to keep that focus. And I think I agree as well that writing as well, we've seen a small dip in the S3, and that again needs to be a continued area of focus.
Supplementary, Councillor?
Thank you. Was just that if teachers need any specific extra training or development or resources on this particular issue, I just wondered if that's going to be provided free of, well, not free of charge, but at cost, or will that come out of PEF funding? Would they have to find supplementary money for that?
What we've done is we've used the individual schools' data. All schools gather their data in relation to pupil performance for curriculum for excellence levels. And across the Regional Improvement Collaborative, we have done an analysis of that, which has helped us identify schools that probably, at this point, numeracy is something that they would need particular focused support in, and that support will come through the working group and the officers who are involved in that, and any outside agencies that we think can contribute to that support. And that won't be at a cost, if you like, to the individual schools, because they've, if you like, self-identified through their data that improvements in numeracy is an area they need to improve, and we're happy to work with them. And eventually that kind of support will be rolled out then to other schools once we're confident that those schools we've been targeting are moving on and developing at the pace that we would expect that to be. However, schools can, of course, at any point use their own PEF funding to buy in, whether it's training or materials or hardware, if they feel that's appropriate and that that would help with attainment in a particular area.
Thanks for the questions. It's a key area, and obviously there's still more work in progress, and it's something the committee will certainly be keeping an eye on, as well as the director. Councillor Forbes first, and then Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I'm on to page 227 of the report, and it's regarding the uptake of school meals, which I see falls slightly in P4 and from P4 to P7. I'm wondering, is that the age that people have to then start paying for their school meals, and if so, could that be the reason for it?
All youngsters up to and including primary 3 are entitled and eligible to a free school meal, so P4 is the point where, yes, youngsters are expected, well, their families are expected to pay for that. That might be a reason behind it. Some of it is just about youngsters getting older and preferring to make choices beyond that which is offered at school. They want to go to the shops with their friends some of the time. Some of them opt to take packed lunch, but it's something that we're looking at very closely, because what we're doing through joint work with our welfare and benefits team is trying to maximise income for as many families as possible, and therefore trying to make sure that all those who are entitled, whether it's up to P3 or beyond, because there's still an entitlement to free school meals for those who are eligible, P4 to 7. So we're trying to make sure that those who are eligible are taking advantage of that eligibility. And we'll have a number of ways of supporting young people to take, if you like, the free school meal in a way that doesn't stigmatise them.
Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I've got a couple of points, so if I can just sort of separate them out for clarity. I absolutely agree with what you said earlier when you were introducing the paper. This is absolutely at the heart of what we're here for. And I was unfortunately unable to attend the briefing last week, so you may have to forgive me if I'm covering some of the ground that was already covered last week. I think there's mixed results out of this. I think we're doing better in some places, we're not doing so well in others, and I think that's a position that seems to have come out of the answers already from today. And my questions are focused around, for example, on page 211, the SCQF levels 4 and 5, where we are behind the virtual comparator, and just sort of a bit of the background as to perhaps why we're behind the virtual comparator, and sort of what is the PKC rate in comparison with perhaps the national rate, because perhaps where we're being compared with is quite different from what the national rate is. So
let's take that one first.
Okay, and if I think Roger is going to pick up on that.
Thank you, Councillor McDade. So in terms of the page 211, yes, we are behind in terms of the virtual comparator. And just to explain a little bit in terms of virtual comparators, for every single pupil that we have in Perth Kinross, they look at across Scotland 10 coming from similar characteristics. So therefore that creates our virtual cohort that we are compared against. We do have, I suppose we do use that. We use that with individual schools, and we tend less to look at it in terms of the whole cohort across Perth and Kinross. So our individual conversations with schools would be about the virtual comparator. So it is a piece of work we would do. This is also the lever data, so this data is referring to August 2017, so it's not reflective of our most recent results in August 2018. That data will be available in February 2019 by the time it comes through the Insight system.
Watch this space to some degree.
Yes, and I'm looking forward to the report next year. Yeah, my next point was on page 221, which is around, if I'm right, yes, the looked after children and vulnerable groups. And I appreciate that this is small numbers and that perhaps you can't compare apples and apples in this case. I'm absolutely unaware of that. But in some cases there's 17% difference from the virtual comparator. That's quite significant, and bearing in mind that we're comparing it with other looked after children elsewhere, we should be comparing a degree of apples and apples. So, my concerns around that are we have quite a significant difference in some points. What is the background to that?
In the recent Integrated Children's Services Inspection report, there was comment made on the fact that we're often dealing with a very small cohort of young people, but actually for those youngsters, outcomes were improving, but it was also recognised that there was further work that needed to be done, and both Jackie and Linda Richards would be able to comment in a bit more detail in relation to that. But we do now, through our corporate parenting approach, take a much closer look at this particular cohort of young people, which of course is never static. It's a never moving group of young people, and we need to take that into consideration as well, that youngsters will move in and out of being care experienced at different points. But through the corporate parenting approach, which is a board that's made up of care experienced young people, as well as individuals who represent a range of important partners who work with us, there is a determination to ensure that what we'll see for this cohort of young people is outcomes that are equal to not just other looked after young people, but equal to other young people who are within our education system. Jackie, do you maybe want to pick up?
Just to add to what the Executive Director said, I absolutely agree that although this is going in the right direction, it's going in the right direction very slowly and is sitting behind the virtual comparator. But one of the things that we have an opportunity over the next 18 months to 2 years is additional funding from the Scottish Government, which is similar to pupil equity funding, but it's targeted at looked after children and young people who are leaving care. And we're currently considering proposals as to how we will effectively use that funding, but much more in an individualised way rather than going through a specific school. It will be targeted at the individual youngsters and their particular needs. So I think there's an opportunity to see how that can actually turn this around and probably and quicken the pace around that.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any other questions? Sorry, Councillor McEwen, you did ask to be heard. Yes.
Page 21 of the report, right at the very bottom right-hand corner, talks about reduction in exclusions, and I know that schools have policies now to reduce the number of exclusions, because that's a positive way forward. The question I have, which I'll probably need to be able to make later, is regarding information further down around unauthorised holidays and trips, how that's gone up. I'd like to have more information on that, please. I know you probably don't have that to hand, so I'm quite happy to get that.
We can take that now, or that it is referred to in the Restorative Justice.
I imagine it's a table with months of the year and numbers of people,
paper,
etc.
Executive Director, do you want to comment now?
Just so I'm clear, Councillor McEwen, specifically you're looking for some more data in relation to any patterns with the unauthorised holidays, trips away. Yeah, okay, yeah, we can provide that information. Yeah.
Are there any other questions on the report? Councillor McDade, you've had one shot. We'll allow you one more brief one, please.
It'll be very brief. It's figure 11 on page 227. The proportion of primary 1 pupils at risk of obesity, and the figure seems to have has increased nearly 6% in 5 years, whereas the Scotland figure has remained fairly static. So I'm just looking for a bit of information around.
Comments, please.
What we have with us today a colleague, Elaine Cruikshank, who works with NHS Tayside and is the group lead for our priority group 3 in our Regional Improvement Collaborative work, part of which is about looking at tackling obesity. Elaine was here to answer questions about group 3, but since she's here, I'm looking into the corner to see if she's happy to say something about that. And I think Paul Davison might be in a position to say something about the data as well. Okay.
Thank you very much for passing the question on. I would just say very briefly that my understanding is that a more detailed update was given on this subject at a previous Perth and Kinross Council Committee meeting, and I think it does very much pertain to data. So I'm very mindful Paul might be able to say something more helpful. From my own knowledge and our own organisation, I know the research that was done into the data suggests that this may have been a glitch, particularly in last year. And although I'm not familiar with the content of the report, I understand you're saying that's obviously now been over a pattern a number of years. Paul, I probably am tempted to hand over to yourself in the hope you know more from the previous update. Apologies.
Yeah, I can't add a huge amount more, but it was looked at the Children, Young People and Families Partnership when the NHS lead came along and looked at the data. They'd looked at it forensically. They couldn't say specifically why, explain the glitch. They did think it was some issue, but there were indications at the time that the latest figure, which is not there but will be out soon, will return to the figure roughly where it was before. But there's still obviously room for improvement because that's still the kind of Scotland figure, whereas I would expect for our area we'd generally outperform that. So some way to go still.
It is an important issue. You're right to raise it. I think it was at Children and Young Persons Families Partnership. So watch this space on that one, because I'm sure that subject will come back again to be considered by the partnership, and everybody gets the minutes. And everybody can have some input into that as appropriate. Are there any other questions on the report? If there are not, could I... The Scrutiny Committee will be having a further look at this, so those of you who are on the Scrutiny Committee can sharpen your pencils again as far as questions are concerned. And that's fine. I think this is I said this is about the core of what we do, but it's also an excellent report, not because it tells us about all the things we've got right and the things we've exceeded expectations, but the ones where we're still working on them, and that's honesty and transparency, and I think that's particularly important, and I value the time the officers have spent in preparing what is a detailed and fairly extensive report, but it gives us the opportunity to ask questions about, well, why are we not further ahead with this, and what are we doing as a council? And it also provides us with the opportunity to support the officers' work in getting there, whether it's through a variety of means. So that's really, really important. But I'll formally move the report, and I guess that there will be a further report in due course on this. Executive Director?
Yeah, we have a requirement to provide this annually to this committee and also to the Scottish Government, and that will continue.
We could maybe add that to the recommendations, just for the record, that there will be a further update in approximately a year's time. Have I a seconder?
Happy to second the paper. I definitely think this paper would pass what I always refer to as the Barbara Vaughan test in terms of detail and ease of read. I'm getting some nods from Audrey at the back who realises what I'm saying. So that's always a good starting point. I think the key bit, I suppose, is that we're seeing good progress being made, but we're not going to be ever complacent. And we need to be able to look our parent council chairs in the eye and promise that we will do everything we can to raise attainment for all our young people, from the pre-birth right through to when they leave school, and ensure that we have high expectations for what all of them can achieve.
Thank you. We've had a range of questions, but there is an opportunity for any comments. Councillor Rebick.
Thank you, Vice Convener. As has already been said, I think raising attainment is at the heart of everything we do in Scottish education and in Perth Kinross Council, and quite right too. Curriculum for Excellence aspires at least to a cohort of young learners who are literate, numerate, but not only that, informed, happy and employable. And I think this report shows that we're somewhat along the road to that. But like evidence success would suggest, if you know where the gaps are and acknowledge where the gaps are, you can put resource and effort into improving that, and I think that's just exactly what this report states. So I would just like to commend the officers, the school staff, the teachers, everybody else in the school for their continuing hard work and dedication, because that is what you get from staff who work in schools, and I commend the report. Thank you.
Thank you for these supportive remarks. We appreciate that. Are there any other comments? In which case I'll pass back to my colleague Vice Convener, Councillor Purves.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. The next report, paper 10, is on the Pupil Equity Fund spend for 2017-18. The report sets out the various allocations to each of the schools in Perth and Kinross over the last academic year, and also how that has been spent. So I'll ask the Executive Director to introduce the report.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. The Pupil Equity Fund is additional money allocated to schools and which is targeted at closing the poverty-related attainment gaps. This report provides details of the use of the PEF allocation of 1.6 million across all eligible schools in Perth and Kinross up to the point of the 30th of June 2018. Funding was allocated on the basis of £1,200 for each child through P1 to S3 who is eligible and registered for free school meals. 8 schools in Perth and Kinross do not meet at that point the eligibility criteria for this funding in the year 2017-18. As with other school improvement planning, the planning for pupil equity fund spend is expected to be based on clear self-evaluation, highlighting poverty-related attainment gaps and identifying the interventions to be used to address these. After 1 year of this funding, individual school evaluations of progress are at a relatively early stage. The poverty-related attainment gaps have been stubbornly resistant to change over an extended period of time, and it would therefore be unreasonable to expect to see significant progress made in a very short period of time, just since the introduction of PEF. But we are making progress and we are moving in the right direction. Ongoing progress and impact of the PEF spend will be reported through schools' own standard and quality reports and through the Raising Attainment Strategy update, which was the previous paper you've just considered. So in future years, we wouldn't need to bring an additional paper, but rather we would incorporate information about PEF in that Raising Attainment Strategy and combine both.
Thank you. Could I perhaps just ask, although this report is on the Pupil Equity Fund spend for 2017-18, in our budget earlier this year, in February, the administration committed £250,000 towards closing the attainment gap and also to help with pupils who might not be eligible for PEF funding. Perhaps either the Executive Director or Mr Hill could give the committee an update on that.
You're absolutely right. There was a recognition that there were some schools that didn't receive funding through PEF, and therefore there was a commitment made in the budget to provide money that would be targeted at particular schools. I know that Roger and Sharon have been working very closely with our head teachers and that could give just a short overview as to how that money is being spent at present. And if it would be helpful, then we can provide more information beyond this committee time for you in relation to that. What we'd certainly have to do, Councillor Purvis, is provide an update in advance of the next budget of how such budget motion monies have been spent.
Thank you. Mr Hill.
Thank you, Councillor Purvis. In terms of the 200,000 from this year's budget, we looked at the allocation to schools through PEF, and we looked at how we could use this money most effectively. We have decided to allocate the funds based on ACORN 4 and 5 for those children in the most deprived areas, and look at every single school so that no school would have zero. So we made a minimum level for every single school of £2,400 and allocated a minimum level of spend for individual ACORN 4 and 5 pupils, which boosted the individual amounts for individual schools. So that has been very much welcomed by schools and will be targeted in a similar manner to the Pupil Equity Fund allocation. We have also taken some of that funding to use for central career-long professional learning in terms of developing leadership and developing our staff in order to drive through improvements at every stage and at every level within our schools. So whereas PEF doesn't allow you to take any central allocation, we've used that as a central one to drive forward improvement and actually make a system change throughout this year. So that's essentially how we've used the 200,000.
Thank you very much. Do you have any questions on the report? Councillor Rebeck, to be followed by Councillor Sarwar.
Thank you, Vice Convener. £1.6 million seems like a guy lot of money to me, but just to gauge some context on that, can I ask how that might compare to the supplies and services budget?
Ms Devlin?
Within a school's devolved school management, there are different streams of funding. So, for example, there's a per capita column, there's an out of per capita column, there's supplies and services, etc. And in terms of the combined allocation within our school supplies and services, devolved school management, the 1.6 million allocation from the Scottish Government is slightly in excess of that across the piece for all schools.
Supplementary or no?
In the interests of being, my apologies in advance for being a bit parochial, but Perth City North has actually got up to £300,000. So again, I'm just trying to gauge from a very parochial point of view how the £300,000 that Perth City North gets in PEF money would compare also to the supplies and services part of the DSN budget.
Well, I can't criticise anyone for being parochial, Councillor Rebeck, so Mr. Devlin.
That's a level of information that I can't bring from the back of my head forward to share with you today, Councillor Rebeck, but in terms of providing that for the schools in your ward, we would be able to provide that for you if you wanted that, so we can do that.
Thank you. Councillor Sarwar to be followed by Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Vice Convener. My questions relate to Appendix 3. I have a few. Do you want them all at once?
Probably easier if we get them one at a time. Yeah.
One at a time,
sorry.
Okay. So this is perhaps the most detailed part of the report in terms of actual spend, but where it lists the committed expenditure for teachers, I just wondered if we could actually have that broken down into what type of teaching staff and what that actually looks like in terms of hours for schools.
I don't know that it would be possible to put it down to actual hours, but in terms of the type of staff, teaching staff who've been, yes, I'm sure that that's something we would be able to get. One of the, just so you know, that one of the things that we have had to do since the introduction of PEF is alter a number of our administrative processes, because with PEF comes a requirement that we're able to report at a pretty granular level on the spend. And so, for example, in terms of the recruitment of staff, it's really important that we understand who's within our core establishment and who might be employed through PEF money, and there's a different process around all of that. So the administration that has come along with PEF, whether it's through it, I see Audrey and Caroline nodding at the back there, but it has required additional HR support and administration. It has required additional finance team administration. It has required additional data analysis requirements that we hadn't done previously. And of course, there's now another reporting requirement on us. So we are actually able to provide information at quite a granular level, but not right down to the number of hours, because we wouldn't be looking at people's timesheets, and it's likely that PEF money might be spent, for example, on supply teachers who would complete timesheets. But we can look at the variety of staff. We would also know which staff have been engaged on a fixed term contract, because nobody can be engaged on a permanent contract using non-recurring funding.
Thank you. Next question.
Yeah, so in terms of the teaching sort of supply, but also I'm looking at education materials, IT support, all of these things. From an outsider's perspective, it can seem somewhat generalised, the support. So is that, you know, in terms of literacy, the head might have looked at, or across a year group? I'm just wondering how narrowed down they've able to be on a pupil level with the PEF.
Individual schools will have that kind of information, but it's not necessarily something that we would want to collate. And in my introduction, I did say that in terms of the spend of PEF, each school is expected to indicate clearly in their school improvement planning how they plan to use PEF money to support their developments. So within a school improvement plan, for example, if they were looking at developing numeracy, they would therefore also have an indication within the school improvement plan of the amount of PEF that might be spent and what that might be spent on to support that development.
Thank you. And you had a third question?
If that's okay, yeah. I know that other schools across the country have used money towards breakfast clubs. I just wondered if there's been much interest in that and whether you foresee that that might increase as the support for breakfast clubs has been decreased in the budget.
I don't know if any of our schools have sought to do that. I don't know if Sharon and Roger would have that level of detail with you. Yep, yep.
Our understanding is that schools have not used it for breakfast clubs.
And that's the case. But part of the reason for that is that we actually received another budget motion amount of money at the last budget to support the development of Safe Starts. So we've actually got another report coming to the budget in relation to how we've tried to support schools through that additional funding for any schools who wish to start to develop a Safe Start or a breakfast club. We've been supporting them through a different means of funding for that. We've also been looking at the costs of our breakfast clubs, and we've been working very closely with Greg's team in Business and Resources to look at the existing breakfast clubs we have and how we can make them more affordable. So there's been quite a lot of work done on breakfast clubs out with PEF.
Thank you. Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Vice Convener. So my question really is around, I think it's a positive thing, money going into attainment. I think it's good that the head teachers are able to decide what is right for their children based on what the needs of the school are. My question is actually more of an HR one, and there's possibly no one here to answer it actually. But it's on page 255, and it's around the support assistant GE3 grading and the admin assistant. And having looked at the job descriptions, in terms of the support assistant, working with children one-to-one, supporting them with intimate care routines, moving them and handling them, contributing to preparation of materials, that seems like quite a responsible job, and there is a quite significant difference, I would call it significant, particularly if you're on that sort of level of wage, difference in what that is banded in terms of what an admin assistant might be banded. So I'm just curious as to why we're distinguishing on such a quite significant £3 an hour difference, 3,000 a year roughly difference between those two posts. And I would have thought that the support assistant one is quite significant and important role.
I can only provide a response in part and can't give significant detail there, other than to say that there's a pretty detailed job evaluation matrix that is used when it comes to evaluating these jobs, and there may be some particular aspects of a role that will carry a greater weighting and therefore take them into the next banding that would be in one and not in the other. But beyond that, I don't have that detail, but again, that's something that colleagues in HR would be able to provide for you, which I can arrange.
I would be grateful if you could. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Vice Convener. I have a comment to make later on, but my question is that the distribution decided by the Scottish Government is on free school meals. That inevitably has its advantages and disadvantages. I won't précis these at the moment, Vice Convener, but is there any indication that that will change in any way or be adapted, or is that just going to be how it is for the time being?
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Again, our understanding from Scottish Government that that criteria will last for the length of the Pupil Equity Fund, which is the length of this Parliament. So they are not planning to make any changes to the allocation system.
Thank you. Mr. McCall.
Thank you. Can I ask what the pupil engagement with distribution of funds has been like? Have they been involved well and regularly, or is that something that's not very prominent at the moment?
I'm afraid I missed the start of your question. Could you repeat your question, please?
Sorry, the people engagement with distribution of funds, are pupils directly involved with what they think maybe will benefit them the most, or are they not involved?
I'll ask Sharon and Roger to pick up on that point.
It's part of the school improvement plans. So school improvement plans should be discussed with the pupil councils within each individual schools. it may not be appropriate to discuss how the funds are being used, considering that they are targeted at closing those poverty-related attainment gaps. So there is a balance to be had about the level of detail that is shared with young people and which they're consulted on. We've seen many cases of, for instance, early literacy projects and pieces of work in there. So they have been involved and engaged in all of that, but whether they're making decision-making, I don't think so at this stage.
Okay. Sure.
Just to add a little bit to that, Roger's quite right that it wouldn't be appropriate to consult with pupils on the use of Pupil Equity Fund. What some schools have done, where they've decided to take a universal approach or to introduce an intervention, they have involved pupils as part of that process of planning for the engagement, but not necessarily the spend of the funds.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions on the report? No? Okay, well, I'm very happy to formally move the report today and the recommendations contained within it. I think the Pupil Equity Fund is extremely beneficial in the fact that it allows head teachers and individual schools to decide how best to spend that money to tackle some of the inequalities and the attainment gap that they have within their schools. So I think that this report is very helpful in setting out how that's been allocated, and it's good to see that what the difference is between the schools. That's very useful to have that information, and then also how that has been spent. So I'm very happy to move the report. Do I have a seconder?
I'm very happy to second the report, and noting in recommendation 4 that there'll be a further report next year. I think these things are it's developing, it's progressing, and it'll be interesting to read next year's report in comparison to this one.
Thank you. Do you have any comments on the report? Councillor Rebeck, to be followed by Councillor Wilson.
Thank you again, Vice Convener. I think the policy of pupil equity funding just underlines the Scottish Government's commitment to trying to tackle years, indeed decades, has been said before, of cultural poverty gap. However, it's easy enough to have a policy as well intentioned as it is, but it has to be carried out, and without wanting to sound glib, I think we in the SNP group here at PKC, we do realise that that has put extra onus and work on head teachers and other senior staff in the schools. My impression, without being patronising it, they've taken that on board because above all, head teachers also want to see the attainment gap closed in their own schools, but it is appreciated for what it's worth. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Vice Convener, and just follow on from Councillor Rebeck's point. Sometimes central government decisions do impact on workloads of head teachers, and I'm glad you recognise that as well as ourselves. Central government funding, no matter who's in charge at Holyrood, is always welcome. However, it's important that the use of that is left to local decision making, the detailed use of it. I'm not talking about the aims and the strategy involved in it. It's perfectly sound strategy. And I hope that we have an assurance that we will continue to have the flexibility over the period of the Parliament, has been indicated, that we, whilst the funding is provided centrally and the formula is decided centrally, that we will here in Perth Kinross as councillors remain in charge with our officers of how the money is dealt with in detail.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Are there any further comments on the report? No? Oh, Councillor Rebeck, you can have another one.
Sorry, it should just be noted as well, just for a point of record, that the funding will last at least the length of the Parliament, and maybe not just the length of this Parliament.
Thank you. Can we agree the report? Thank you.
Paper 11, the Tayside Regional Improvement Collaborative Progress and TRIC Plan 2018 reports are in front of you. It's quite detailed reading, and I'm not going to, quite sure there's going to be quite a lot of questions, so hand straight over to the Executive Director to introduce the report.
Thank you, Convener. I'm pleased to bring, it's really two reports in one to you today, and I'm also very pleased that here today we have Sharon Johnson, who is the lead across the Regional Improvement Collaborative for Priority Group 1 on early years. You're stuck with me in relation to the second group on learning and teaching. Unfortunately, our colleague who leads that from Angus is unable to be here today. I've already introduced Elaine Cruikshank, our colleague from NHS Tayside, who is the lead of Priority Group 3, which focuses on aspects of health and well-being. We'll have Linda Richards here, who is a member of Priority Group 4, which is about supporting our more vulnerable children and young people, and Jackie Pepper, who is the lead for Priority Group 5, which is around child protection, safeguarding and well-being. I hope that the fact that there's Sharon, myself, Linda and Jackie provides additional reassurance, if any was needed, that there is significant involvement from colleagues, not just at our level, but all levels throughout the work of the collaborative. This report, as I say, provides a comprehensive update of the progress that has been made and also the work that is planned for in coming months, working alongside our partners in Angus, Dundee, NHS Tayside and indeed Police Scotland and Third Sector. Included for your consideration is the Year 1 update in relation to the joint work we had identified in our shared Integrated Children's Services Plan, which is a statutory requirement of every individual local authority. And you may remember that that was one of the first pieces of collaborative work that we agreed to undertake, rather than there be 3 separate Integrated Children's Services plans, which NHS Tayside and Police Scotland would be part of each 3 separate ones. We would have one combined one. And so what you have before you is the update that we provide to Scottish Government in relation to that. And additionally, we have the Phase 2 plan, which focuses on Priority Group 2, the Learning and Attainment Group, which is included for consideration by this committee. In the cover report, there is a summary of some of the areas of progress that we have made in each of those priority groups, and any one of the group members or group leads or myself would be happy to answer any questions that you might have on either of the 2 reports.
Thank you, Sheena. Is there any or are there any questions? Councillor McDade.
Yeah, I've got 2 questions, but I'll ask them together because both should be quite quick, I would think. First one is, are there other groups in place within the collaborative other than the 5 that are listed, such as group looking at a single public estate? And what is the cost to PKC of taking part in the collaborative in terms of officer time and resources?
There are other groups. The 5 main priority groups that were identified in the initial Tayside plan for children and young people are the 5 that are in that jigsaw representation. In addition to that, if we take the learning and teaching part of that jigsaw, there are 4 subgroups in that, and we have added this year an additional 2. The 4 are listed there, and the additional 2 are in the Phase 2 plan, and for everybody's information, that's around looking at curriculum support, particularly in secondaries for particular subjects, and that is being led by colleagues in Education Scotland, which is extremely helpful. And the other group that's been established is one that, if you like, has an overarching role across all the groups that looks to make sure that any approach that is intended to take place to bring about improvement is that which is best evidence-based. And that group will also, if you like, take a bit of an overview as to how progress is being made in any lessons learned that can come from that. Additionally, we have a group that looks at data, performance information, and actually Paul Davidson is the lead for that. And we also have a group around commissioning, because we recognise that there could be merit and economies of scale across the whole regional area. If we're all individually commissioning the same services, there could be merit in looking at that. One of the interesting things that the commissioning group want to look at is the allocation and the spend of PEF, to see if schools are looking to buy in particular supports, that there might be a more economical way for them to do it if they did it together rather than individually. So I think that's really helpful. The most recent group that has established that probably has come about because of the work that we're doing around the educational side of the collaborative is not wholly yet about the entire school estate, but it is about looking at, for example, in the context of early years, where there will be significant capital investment across all areas, is there a way that we can work together so that we can benefit from any economies of scale, and also understanding that across Scotland there will be significant demands in terms of construction and build programmes, and we're trying to see if we can manage that more efficiently and effectively. And similarly, the early discussions around what is being known as the Tri-School has established a short life working group that is looking at that. And what will happen is over time these groups will evolve and develop. Some groups might drop off, other groups will emerge, and that dynamic and flexible approach is something that I'm attracted to, that what we've necessarily started out with might not always be what we finish up with, but what we have at any one time are groups looking at areas that are of priority and importance for us. Sorry, you had another part to a question.
Yeah, my second question, which perhaps is more relevant even more now that you've explained how many groups there are, is what is the cost to PKC of taking part in the collaborative in terms of officer time and resources?
There's not been a cost analysis done. We came together as 3 local authorities with our colleagues in health and produced an integrated children's services plan, which was the Tayside plan for children and young people. And in that, there were priorities that we all signed up and agreed would be our day job, if you like. And therefore, colleagues are working on what would be the day job, but it might be in slightly different ways, because it might not just be that they're working within Perth and Kinross, that they would work across the other local authority areas, as we'd done previously when we received funding for the 1+2 approach to developing modern languages. We just pooled our resources and have worked together collectively there. So in terms of a demarcation of how much time, if you like, is spent on what you could describe as Perth and Kinross work, or what is collaborative work, we don't have that. But another important point here is that all areas of improvement work are not necessarily areas of improvement that we would be taking forward in collaboration with others. So there are still areas for improvement and develop that we will work on in Perth and Kinross, and that might be by ourselves, or it might be in partnership with other local authorities, because we are not bound to only work in collaboration with those colleagues that are referenced here in the plans.
Councillor Donaldson.
Yes, can I just ask, with the Tayside Collaborative, and obviously in some respects it's early days, but how do we compare with other parts of Scotland in terms of the approach that we're taking? Or in Tayside and with ourselves in Perth and Kinross, are we significantly ahead of the field on this?
That's an interesting and a difficult question to answer, Councillor Donaldson, because we are the only regional improvement collaborative who have taken a children's services approach. And if you may or you may not realise that our work as a collaborative actually began back in September 15, which was before the Education Governance Review, and we had determined that we would come together, seek areas of commonality that we wanted to work on to improve. And as I said earlier, it wouldn't necessarily be that we were starting from the same point, but that we recognised there were improvements to be made. But we were also determined that if we were going to come together to collaborate to ultimately improve educational outcomes for children and young people, that we needed to do that in a holistic sense. And that was by working with all partners who support children and families, not just schools, because schools alone won't close the poverty-related attainment gaps, and I think we all recognise that that's the case. And so therefore we are quite unique in the context of the other 6 collaboratives about our approach. All I can say is that the feedback that we've had from Scottish Government colleagues and from Education Scotland colleagues is that we're of significant interest to them, and indeed to my other 5 regional improvement collaborative leads, because of the approach that we've taken. And what I'm beginning to see now is more of a drift towards that children's services approach in some of the other collaboratives that perhaps wasn't there at the beginning.
So just as a quick follow-up, I think what you're saying, I think it's very interesting, but it may well be in the first, in the next 2-3 years, it will be quite difficult to compare and contrast with the other collaboratives because we're taking a much more encompassing approach to the issues involved.
And the other thing that I don't think there was an intention when the collaboratives were established that we would necessarily be comparing between collaboratives, but there was a view that each collaborative should identify the areas for improvement that were most important for them. So, for example, not all of the other 5 collaboratives will necessarily have a health and well-being work stream, and therefore it would be impossible to say that our collaborative has made X amount of progress in the area of health and well-being compared to others. But what we will be able to say is that across our collaborative, because we've got baseline data that is supporting the planned work, here's the improvements that we've made in Perth and Kinross, in Dundee and Angus, and in fact over the NHS Tayside area as a whole in these different areas. Councillor Wilson?
Thanks, Convener. To follow on from Councillor Donaldson's point, which was a good one, I think we were ahead of the game, at least in having an informal collaborative before we were asked to provide one. And that's quite powerful, because volunteers worth 10 press people, as you know. I think the other issue is the holistic view of including children and families. Before my colleague on my left reminds me of that title, children and families, within the education remit in the collaborative is really, really important, because that's what the government policy is seeking to do. And there's sometimes the silos in Holyrood forget that. COSLA and others remind them fairly regularly about that. But it's really important that that's taken as a holistic approach. End of wee lecture from me. I'm on page 285, and I'm on PG3, TRIC PG3, a new form of acronyms, health and well-being. 2 things there, it's all a value, right? But 2 things particularly, and I think they're some of the most difficult ones. Bullet point 2, agreed approach for national pregnancy and parenthood in young people, strategy implementation. I'd like a wee bit more flesh on the bone of that. And also the last one, efforts to align children and young people strategy developments with 3 Tayside Health and Social Care partnership developments, because as well as having 3 councils to deal with, we've also got 3 health and social care partnerships, and that adds its challenges as well to try to keep them on board, because they do have an impact on what we're doing with children and young people. So sorry, I may have picked the most difficult questions, but if Elaine is able to give us a wee bit more insight into these, I'm sure the committee would be very grateful.
Thank you very much for your questions. Sorry about that. Your first point about the pregnancy and parenthood and young people's strategy, the implementation of the national strategy, that is, we have an executive lead who sits within the health and wellbeing priority group, which is priority group 3, as the Children and Families Executive Director has mentioned. That executive lead has established a small multi-agency pan-Tayside task and finish group. And currently the work of that group has been to establish the current approaches in the 3 areas as to the current state and current position of work ongoing. There's been national Scottish Government involvement in that activity, and the plan is to take learning from the 3 areas where work has been ongoing, look to the learning from that and the best parts, and actually plan a Tayside approach to that implementation based on that learning. From the point of view of your second question, I would say that you pick up on a very, very valid and key point, because you're absolutely right. The 3 health and social care partnerships are yet wider partners that we absolutely endeavour to consult and engage with this work. It is in all honesty, a strand that's at an earlier stage, but we have examples of direct communications with health and social care partnership managers. If I take the example of mental health in Dundee, where the health and social care partnership is developing its own new mental health strategy for the adult population, we are already in conversation with those managers to look at the transition points and the developments that we will want to reflect in the children and young people mental health strategy that is developing. There are plans for similar conversations within Angus and Perth and Kinross Health and Social Care Partnership. That's an example of one area where we're just trying to align the work and engage our partners there as well as we are our other partners.
I'm very grateful for these comprehensive answers. Maybe we could raise with our colleagues in the Social Care Partnership the importance of these strands of work. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? No. In moving the report, I'd just like to say I was really encouraged by the comments the Executive Director made that you know, whilst at the moment the work that's been done is being done across Tayside, you know, we will look to other places, and indeed just last year we took forward a project that we had looked into North Yorkshire for, you know, which is quite far away. So our sphere of research and looking for ideas and ways, because there's always somebody else that's been through what you're going through, or you know, whatever. So I think it is very much making sure that we look locally, nationally, and even further afield if need be for examples of good practice that we can use to benefit our children, young people and their families. So happy to move the report. Seconder.
Convener, I think due to do it in view of the hour and the time, I'll formally move the report, or second the report.
Thank you, Vice Convener. And it kind of feel a bit unfortunate that this final paper is at 5 minutes to 5, and perhaps even if we move it forward just now, but we could perhaps bring it back just for more detailed discussion, because I think there will be members would probably be looking to do that, so we can try and see, she was looking at me, if there's a way that we can accommodate that.
This or the restorative?
Both of them actually, because there's quite a lot of detail in it that I feel we've maybe not had the chance to dig into this afternoon.
If I could offer, Convener, perhaps, I'm conscious that these are two well written but nonetheless lengthy and perhaps dense reports, and that it might be more appropriate to follow up with a presentation and an interactive session where there can be a bit more to and fro in terms of the discussion around that. So I would be very happy to arrange that in relation to the work of the collaborative.
Thank you. And we'll move on to paper 12. And oh, sorry, Councillor Ribbick.
I'll just be very brief, but but it is important. You're right. And I think one note of caution, I think as we collaborate, it's important we listen to stakeholders and we listen to what comes out of that collaboration. However, the principle of collaboration has got to be good practice. It's got to be a good thing. It's the right thing to do, as is the sharing of less positive experiences in order to avoid making the same mistakes. I'm acutely aware that it absolutely works in child protection and community safety, and I don't think there's any reason why it shouldn't work in education as well. So I would commend the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ribbitt. Any further comments, Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, could I just welcome a presentation on this? I'm looking at this. There's a lot to do at this time of night, and I welcome your comments on we need a presentation and that. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Ford.
Thank you, Convener. I'm a big fan of collaboration. Just one note of caution, and we know very well in this room that our standards in Perth and Kinross are extremely high, and I think I would just be cautious that we help bring other council standards up and ours don't diminish as a result of collaboration, but I am very much in favour of it.
I'm sure officers would definitely have that at the front of their thinking. Any further comments, or can we agree the report? I'll hand over to Councillor Wilson for the final item.
Convener, thank you. And colleagues, in view of the time, I think I might be mercifully brief in this. I had written on my paper before we started, briefing for members. So I'd like to add that to the recommendations, because I think restorative justice, which has been around for a long time, is something that some people need a wee bit of time and thought to get their heads round, and also find out how it fits into a lot of other policies and strategies. Executive Director, have you?
I hear you, Councillor Wilson, I do. Education and Children's Services remains committed to restorative approaches in all of our schools. The strategy focuses on the quality of relationships between all members of the school community. Comprehensive national research has been undertaken by University of Edinburgh, which concluded that restorative approaches contributed to significant improvement in key areas of school discipline and to staff and pupils' relationship. Similarly, there is comprehensive research which points to the inefficacy of a solely punitive punishment approach. Back in May 2016, a report was presented to the then Lifelong Learning Committee advising on how restorative approaches was to be implemented across Perth and Kinross schools, and this report is an update in relation to that.
Questions? Councillor McDade.
I've got a quick question on page 390, 2.1.5. It's about the Community School of Ulster Ardor as focused on restorative peer mediation. And I just wondered if you could tell us a wee bit more about that. It sounds very interesting.
Thank you, Councillor McDade. In terms of the example, Community School of Ulster Ardor has, for a period of time last year, been working with intergenerational volunteers from the community, working with young people. Now, as well as supporting literacy and numeracy across the school, they're also there in terms of being a listening ear to young people at various times to support young people within the school. So I'm happy to bring forward a more detailed case study, which we have to hand, which was not included in these papers, but I'm happy to bring that case study of how it's been used within Community School of Ulster Ardor.
I think that would be very interesting, thank you.
And just in relation to that, I've been to one of the presentations undertaken by Community School of Ulster Ardor. The quid pro quo is huge between the volunteers and the young people, and the sense of worth that a number of volunteers have expressed working with young people. And in terms of not just improving relationships between young people and staff in schools, but young people within their community, we are seeing positive effects there, so it's very good.
I think I would absolutely echo that, and I think there is, as you say, a lot of evidence to back that up in a lot of different examples, including in health and social care, etc., where it is entirely beneficial, and I think we should encourage more schools to do more of that and hopefully roll out across the piece, which I'm sure is coming.
Any further questions?
I think, Councillor, is the essence of the report. Are there any? Thinkman, comments? Do you want to go? Well, I'll formally move the report, and I think you're seconding me.
I believe I am, yes. Yeah. There was actually a leaflet that I received,
it's here.
Which was a one-page summary of what restorative approaches is, which I gather was meant for parent councils, is that correct? And it might be useful if that could be circulated to members, because for me it was, just a really simple understanding of what it's all about, and if that's the information we given into schools for staff, parents and pupils to see, I think that would be very helpful.
I think we've moved the report formally, so comments now. Yeah. Councillor Sarwar.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, as somebody with a background in peace education in schools and conflict resolution more generally, just really welcome this report. But as comments have been made at the end of such a heavy agenda, it's kind of a shame that something that's such a really good nugget has been kind of almost lost, and it would be great to bring that back. And I was also going to say that I think a case study would really bring this to life for people. So if that's Ulster Ardor and anybody that's been willing to be involved in that, it would be great to have something interactive for us to see.
Would you like us to arrange for a session prior to Lifelong Learning Committee that actually is from a school who then talks about restorative approaches in action, and you're not then having to read the paper and ask questions to us, and that'll bring it to life a bit more?
I think that useful suggestions. I agree entirely with you, Councillor Sarwar. It's a pity we've got to this hour, but I can see by some folks' body language and also the expressions on your faces, we've kind of just about had our quota of stuff for today. However, I have two suggestions. I think we have the briefing session when maybe before a lifelong learning committee, so we could allow people the maximum opportunity to attend, and we can maybe arrange that with the soup and the sandwiches at lunchtime to combine these two things, and we can include the presentation from the high school at Achterarder as well, or the community school, sorry, Achterarder. And if we feel it's appropriate, we might reintroduce the paper onto the agenda again further up, so to allow a bit more discussion on it and a bit more deliberation on it in early course.
Can I ask that the training materials are also included in that's being used across the
Okay, any other comments? Back to the convener to close the meeting.
Thank you very much for your attendance this afternoon. It's been a long one, but very productive, so thank you very much. And if you're going guysing, stay safe.